everybody, and welcome to Shift F1, a podcast about speedy race cars. I am Drew Scanlon. Joining me, as always, we have Danny O'Dwyer. How are you, Danny?
I'm doing good. In the preamble of the show, we had a 5-minute conversation about compounds of tires. It feels like F1 is back, baby.
Oh, we are back in it with a bullet. Also joining us, as always, we have Rob Zachney. How are you, Rob?
Feeling great. Already my confidence is shaken, given that like seemingly simple things with F1 are a little more complicated and weirder than you think they would be.
Well, it's a good thing we're here. Welcome, everyone, to our annual Preseason Primer episode. This is where we explain how Formula One, it would help if I could get the name right, how it works, who everybody is, and how to have fun watching it, all while assuming you, listener, have no prior knowledge of the sport or even racing in general. So if you are brand new to F1, or maybe you've watched some Netflix's Drive to Survive, you have come to the right place. And even if you aren't new to F1, stick around because we're going to cover everything and everyone that is new this season. But a little bit about this podcast. Regularly, we see it as sort of a companion piece to the F1 season. We post an episode every week, usually on Wednesdays, to talk about the news in the racing world, what to expect from the next race, and if a race has just happened, what happened and why, because there's always incidents to unpack and to armchair quarterback. We also take listener questions at shiftf1podcast@gmail.com. And of course, we are entirely listener supported on Patreon. Patrons get access to our Discord channel and our back catalog of patron exclusive episodes that cover racing documentaries like Senna and Michael Fassbender's Road to Le Mans,
And
primers
cars.
and cars.
And what's the worst one we've done? What's the stupidest one we've done? Gone in 60 seconds. Fast and Furious?
That was
Fast and
fun.
Furious was great. That was a great
good.
pick.
Yeah, we did that French art house movie. The one, what was that called again?
Rendezvous.
That was a bit
Rendezvous
weird.
was awesome.
Classic.
Yeah, good stuff.
Also primers for other racing series like Formula E, and we have an upcoming one on IndyCar. So if you would like to support the show, you can do so over at patreon.com/shiftf1 or click the link in the show notes. But that's the regular episode. This one is a little bit different, as you could probably see by the runtime. So a quick note before we jump in, there's going to be a lot of info in here. So don't worry about remembering all of it. Just kind of let it wash over you, and you'll pick up what you pick up. Watching races, I think, is really what helps it all come together, because you'll watch things and then go, oh, okay, there's that thing they talked about on the podcast. And you can always listen to it again.
It is, it is worth mentioning that this podcast was set up basically as a preseason primer for you, Drew, to get into Formula One. So it's always been part of the, I always feel like we're sort of like the, like driver's ed for people who want to get into Formula One. And maybe some of our listeners eventually, make it to the big leagues. Those podcasts I keep hearing about where they're full of expert detailed engineering analysis. But here we're all about the japes and the fun times. And we'll get you in. We're the gateway drug to this very weird sport.
Accessibility is the name of the game here. All right. So without any further ado, to kick things off, Formula One is the world's fastest, arguably the most prestigious, and most watched motor racing championship.
If it's not the most prestigious, what is?
I mean, Le Mans has a certain prestige, a certain,
True.
I don't know,
maybe
glamour.
one of those boat race, the America's Cup.
As one race, people could not pick Le Mans drivers or Le Mans teams out of a lineup.
That's true.
I do like endurance racing, but yeah, in terms of like people recognizing cars and drivers, I think F1's like always kind of had the mind share, like since its inception.
Lando Norris can't walk down the street without getting stopped.
Yeah, I mean it's where everyone wants to be. Whether you're a driver or an advertiser or a team principal. But it's been around since 1950. It works like a lot of other sports. There are teams that compete at events over the course of a season, and at the end of the season, a champion is crowned. So to break that down, there are 10 teams with 2 cars each, meaning that there are 20 cars in every race. This year, there are 23 races, each at a different track across 20 different countries. We'll get to exactly where we're going later in the episode. The season takes place from March through November, and both teams and drivers earn points for how they finish in each race. The driver and the team with the most points at the end of the season win the championship. And there are actually 2 championships, one for the driver and one for the teams, which is called the Constructors' Championship. The team's points are made up of their drivers' points, and this usually means that the winner of the Drivers' Championship is usually on the team that wins the Constructors' Championship, but not always.
Not always. It was last year, but it was not the year prior.
Very true. But really, all anyone cares about is the Drivers' Championship. That's kind of what we're all watching for. The teams care about the Constructors' Championship because how they finish has a direct effect on the amount of money that they receive from Formula One. The higher you finish, the more money you get. Money's at the heart of a lot of sports, and it's no different in F1, and it's maybe even the most pronounced in Formula One than a lot of the other stuff.
Money
that,
is closer
you're familiar with.
Is not closer to the heart of any other sport than it is Formula One. I mean, other sports, or rather, I feel like a lot.
Football.
That's
soccer.
I feel like other sports have been playing catch up, but Formula One has always, or for the longest time, has had more to do with that, and a large part of that is because these cars are really, really complicated.
Yeah, I mean, there's the technology aspect of it too, the R&D. It's a sort of feedback loop that tends to keep the top teams at the top, which and they are trying to curb that a little bit. I'll get into that in a second, but that does make it all the more exciting, though, when another team does well. I remember having this revelation, Danny, when we were first starting this, that it can be really exciting to see someone come in third because they're an underdog, right? I didn't grasp before that, like, it's not always about who wins the race. We've even had our fair share of surprise wins recently, which is really fun.
We've had situations where somebody's come 10th and gotten their first point, and we were all like cheering it. Like, that was the thing we cared about more than anything else.
Yeah, and the more you know about like a team or a driver's capabilities, the more exciting it can be when you watch them exceed those capabilities. So that's another reason why we do this podcast, because the more you know, the more exciting the races are.
Yeah, we let you know what you're supposed to be excited about. So hopefully the next time you watch a race, you know to be excited about that thing.
But back to the money.
Yes.
The drivers technically don't earn any prize money from F1. I actually get this question a lot. But they do receive bonuses from their teams based on how they finish in the championship. The bonuses are defined by their contracts, so they aren't really publicized, but many F1 drivers are very well paid. Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton was 17th on last year's Forbes list of the highest paid athletes, with $57 million of on-the-field earnings, just behind Bills quarterback Josh Allen. But as I said, F1 is trying to curb that feedback loop with a spending cap, which is relatively new. One team breached the spending cap in 2021 and was penalized with a fine and a reduction in the amount of wind tunnel time that they can use to develop their next car. This year,
I love how we're basically on the first chapter of this, and you've already entered the way in which people are being punished because they don't get enough wind tunnel time.
Yeah,
we'll explain why that's important later.
Yeah. So this year, the budget cap is $135 million, just to put kind of a perspective here.
Come on, how are you supposed to buy, get the groceries done with that? Come on.
And crucially, because you just alluded to what Lewis Hamilton makes, to make this all work, they exempted 3 salaries for every F1 team. Your 3 highest paid people, your 3 biggest talents ostensibly, are exempt from the spending cap. So if you have a Lewis Hamilton who has won an eye-watering number of championships, you can pay him about what he commands on the driver market, and crucially, you can also spend money on like really top-flight engineering talent. But you only get 3 of these positions that don't count toward the spending cap. After that, every time you're paying somebody, that is less money that you have to spend on other parts of the operation for the season.
If you could get 2 of the drivers to marry each other, that would probably, you could probably squeeze a 4th in then, because you just like pay or Susie Wolf could come work at Mercedes. Just double what Toto's earning. It's off the books. It doesn't matter.
Let's make an LLC here. Just
exactly.
Pay, yeah. But we're one step away from having an account in the Caymans at this point. It's interesting though, because like it used to be that, a big team like Ferrari could just spend like $500 million and just test their car all the time, and infinite wind tunnel expenditures and all this stuff, and then they would of course win championships. But now one of the smallest teams, Haas, recently said that they'll probably be able to spend that much to hit the budget cap of 135 million with the help of their new sponsor. So in theory, we are seeing more of a fair fight. This is the lowest the budget cap has ever been, but it remains to be seen whether, what kind of an effect it'll have this year.
Yes, and actually that's one thing to mention during this primer, especially hello if you're coming to us from later in 2023, because we will be telling people to come back to this at the top of every podcast, is that once testing and the sort of first race happens, a lot of the big questions are answered about where the gaps are, who's fast this year, what driver is going to do well, all that sort of stuff. So at this point, we're sort of in the beautiful, sort of wondrous, anything can happen mode of a season. And in a number of weeks, when the cars make their way around the first track, that will be the moment in which our dreams are crushed back down to reality.
And then sometime in June, we will say that's a wrap. I guess we'll see how this all shakes out by November. Although sometimes there's a real tug of war. There are, like, F1 is an odd sport where sometimes you can tell everything from those first couple races, and sometimes you see a shootout go all the way to the finish line,
like we did 2 years ago,
a couple years ago.
Yeah,
yep.
Literally the last
lap.
Last lap.
Yeah.
All right, so what will you see when you sit down and watch a race? For any given race weekend, there are actually a few more events that happen. First, there are the practice sessions, 2 on Friday and 1 on Saturday, that last about an hour each. Since the cars change every year and the track conditions are never consistent, it's important for teams to send their cars around and dial in their setups by making all kinds of adjustments to like the aerodynamic elements and brake bias and all that stuff. Most of that is invisible since teams tend to play their cards pretty close to their chest, but you can usually get a broad sense of how a team might do based on their practice performance. The next event is qualifying, which is kind of a misnomer. You can't really fail to qualify for a race in the modern era of F1.
Can you still technically, if there was a, 8% rule, if you're...
They waived it, the 108% rule, but they waived, because there was that year where you had 3 baby teams sort of limping along at the back, and they were struggling to make, I think it was the 107% rule. So you could, the slowest car on the grid had to be within 107% of the time set by the pole sitter.
I think it was the
but and so you, like if you missed it by that much, you would sort of miss qualifying. But it would have been so embarrassing to have a bunch of new teams just not make the race that I believe they waived that rule every single time it came.
Yeah, but that's why it was originally called qualifying, I guess.
Right. These days, it's more about determining the order that the cars will start the race. Qualifying takes place on Saturday after the third practice session, and it is divided itself into 3 sessions that are each about 15 minutes long. In the first session, which we call Q1, all 20 cars go out on track and try to set the best lap time that they can. At the end of the session, the slowest 5 cars are eliminated, and those are the cars that start at the back of the grid in positions 20 to 16. In Q2, the remaining 15 cars go out again, and again, the slowest 5 are knocked out. So in Q3, 10 cars are left, and their best times in that session determine their starting order. So the fastest car in Q3 starts the race in front, and we call that pole position.
Usually, but then there are 6 races where that's not necessarily the way it's going to go.
Yeah, we'll get to that wrench in the works. It's important to know though that it's how you do in each session that determines your starting place, not your overall time. So, for example, rain could show up in Q3 and make everybody slower than all the cars that got knocked out in Q2, but those in Q3 will still start in the top 10.
Yeah, it's almost like Squid Game or something. It's
great.
It's a new round every time.
Yeah, like the ticking of the clock really adds to the drama, and despite qualifying being basically a time trial, it can be really fun to watch. You can get some pretty amazing moments, especially if the rain shows up, which tends to throw everybody's plans into disarray. But most importantly for me, qualifying is really the first chapter in the story of the race weekend. I feel sort of incomplete if I don't watch qualifying and just turn on a race because, like, wait a minute, how's that guy starting in third place? I want to know that. The races are on Sunday and last a maximum of 2 hours, during which they drive over 190 miles. The number of laps varies because each circuit has a different length. They all feature, the races, at least one pit stop, which Rob will get to later. And at the end, the drivers are awarded points that contribute to their championship standing. Crucially, only the top 10 finishers are awarded points, with the first getting 25 points, second place gets 18 points, third place gets 15, and so on down to 1 point for 10th place. It is pretty brutal if you finish outside the top 10, getting 0 points after doing a whole race weekend. And it's, a lot of the cost comes from just getting to the track, right? This happens across, like I said, 20 different countries in, 9 months or whatever. But that's just, getting into the points, like you said, Danny, can be really exciting. It's just one of many stories that you as a viewer are kind of watching over a weekend.
Yeah, and the fights and the constructors and stuff are as important at the bottom as they are at the top. In some cases, more important because sometimes the survivability of the team, is sort of hooked to them getting 7th place and getting that extra bit of cash money and probably sponsorship money for landing a good spot. So sometimes the battles are between folks who have accumulated, 25 or 30 points for the entire season. So even though, the lower teams are really getting the dregs of the points, they're no less important.
Right. So now that we've thrown all of that at you, there is one more kind of confusing event that only shows up occasionally. Like Danny said, there are 6 sprint events scheduled for this year. Sprints are like short races and take place between qualifying and the race. So on sprint weekends, qualifying's on Friday. That sets the grid for the sprint, which takes place on Saturday. The sprint, like I said, is basically a short race. It's 1/3 the distance of the normal race. There are no pit stops, and the position you finish in the sprint will be how you start the race. So just to recap, qualifying happens. That sets the grid for the sprint. The sprint happens. It's kind of like a race. How you finish the sprint is how you start the race. Also, the top 8 finishers in the sprint also earn points, with 8 points for first place down to 1 point for 8th place.
Yeah, not as many.
Sprints are relatively new. They're a little divisive. F1 basically introduced them so that they could sell more tickets and TV time.
Yep.
I find it best to think about them as part of the race with a day-long break in the middle.
Yeah, they feel more like races than they do qualifying, which is, I guess, why they don't call them qualifying, even though we all kind of called it sprint qualifying colloquially a little bit. Interesting this year, there's 6. There was 3 the past 2 seasons. And I've also mixed them up this year. So I think we're only getting 2 places that have had sprint races before, and the other ones are all new. So it should be interesting. Also, there is one other way you can get a point, isn't there, Drew?
There is.
There is, if you get the fastest lap.
Of course. Yes, I forgot.
Relatively new rule as well.
That's right. Relatively new. If you score the fastest lap in the race and you are within the top 10, you score an additional championship point, which means if you are outside the top 10, you could do the fastest lap. Sometimes what teams will do on the final lap, they'll pit, get brand new tires, and then go really fast and get the fastest lap. If you do that and you're outside the top 10, you effectively take away a point from whoever held the fastest lap in the top 10.
It's great. Just nag somebody else.
It's another little it's 1 point, so it's relatively small, but it can, make for some interesting strategy.
And if you're wondering why the cars go faster at the end, there's numbers of reasons, the amount of rubber on the track and the temperature of the track. But one of the more crucial elements is the fact that, 1, they can find a spot on the track where there's not much traffic, and 2, there is not as much fuel in the car, so that they're the lightest they have been for the entire race right at the end.
Yeah, good point. All right, on to the teams. Like I said, 2 drivers per team. Teammates in F1 are a little weird. They do sometimes work together. For instance, the car behind will be ordered to defend against another attacking team, but that's only if the driver listens to the team's orders. They usually do, but sometimes they don't.
Multi-21, so multi-21.
Every driver out there thinks that they are the best, and they all especially want to beat their teammates because their teammate is the only one with the same machinery that they have. It's a pretty poor reflection on your abilities if your teammate beats you every time in the same car. But before we get to those teams and their drivers, a quick note about how to tell them apart on track. Each team has a pretty distinct paint job, which we call a livery. But the cars within the same team look practically identical. They had the numbers different on the side, and the drivers do wear helmets, but that's really tough to see when they're going so fast on TV. The major difference between each car is the color of their camera pod, which is sometimes called a T-bar because it looks like a giant squat letter T sitting on top of the car just behind the driver's head. It's what houses the on-car camera for television. One driver will have a black T-bar, while another one will have a fluorescent yellow one. And typically it's the more senior driver that has the black one, but that's not always the case. So be on the lookout for our spotters guide that we'll post on our Twitter and Mastodon accounts as we get closer to the first race.
The way that I have always historically done it is by seeing what cars are in front and ahead of them on television and quickly glancing up at the order that is on the side of the television and just going,
oh, yeah, that's a good one.
There's a Red Bull and there's a Ferrari and a AlphaTauri behind them. Okay, that must be,
What sequence is that?
Basically, yeah. But then sometimes that can throw you off as well because of back markers and all that type of stuff.
Also, one more note about engines that can be a little confusing. A lot of teams will have names that you've heard of, like Mercedes and Ferrari. And in addition to being F1 teams, they're so-called works teams that also make their own engines. And then they sell those engines to other smaller teams, which are called customer teams. So with each team breakdown, we'll also mention the engine manufacturer because it's important to know.
Yes.
And with that, let's get to the teams. Danny, do you want to kick us off here? We're going to go in championship order of how the teams finished last year.
Constructors Championship?
Constructors Championship. Thank you.
Wow. I'm looking at Rob's up next with Ferrari. Did they really come second in the end?
They pulled it out by 50 points. Wow. It surprised me.
Oh, yeah,
it felt
of course.
tighter by the end.
Yeah, God, I forgot we were talking about that. Anyway, sorry, we're not here. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about Red Bull. Yes, that's right. The energy drink company also has a Formula One team. A pretty popular one and a pretty successful one, given how short a spell in the grand scheme of things they have been in the sport. Red Bull entered the F1 in the sort of start of the 21st century. They came in with a fairly well-invested team with some great personnel and a bunch of great drivers. And pretty quick, they had a lot of success. They had a sort of 4-year run between 2010 and 2014 where they were super dominant in the sport. And they, in recent years, have sort of started to emulate that exact thing. Red Bull is easily spotted, I feel like. It's one of the more distinct liveries on the track. It is a sort of dark blue with yellow highlights all over it, much like, the drink. It kind of looks like a can that's being driven around. Their engine is currently supplied by Honda, although over the past number of years there has been some wondering and waxing and waning about who their engine supplier will be in the future. It's Ford, right?
So this is a weird one. So Honda was officially their engine manufacturer. Honda didn't have a team at the time,
yes,
but they did make Red Bull's engine. Honda then decided they didn't want to be in F1 anymore,
right?
And kind of sold the IP rights to Red Bull, who then were making their Red Bull engine that was developed by Honda.
Yeah.
Now they're like repartnering again, so it's it's like Red Bull powertrains powered by Honda or something. It's weird. Yeah. Honda came up with the idea for their engine, and they're kind of working on it together, I guess is how
Yeah.
it's going.
It's like if you wanted to build like a chest of drawers in your house, but like your neighbor was actually really good at doing it. Like you started it, but they kind of came over and helped. Like it's kind of like Honda are just like, I don't know, seeing out the relationship on this one until they have their new partnership.
And then Ford was like, hey, I would love to make a similar chest of drawers for you.
Exactly. Want me to move in? I'll make it chest of drawers. There's probably going to be weird analogies like that for the rest of the season. So if you don't like that, you might want to just like unsubscribe now.
Hashtag Ford drawers.
Red Bull are, of course, based in Austria. You can tell because they have their own Formula One track, which we will be racing at later this year. They're I guess from historically, like the country or the company from Austria, but like most F1 teams are actually based in the UK for all intents and purposes.
The money is in Austria. The building is in the UK.
Yes, the cans are in Austria. The cars are in the UK.
Milton Keynes.
Yes, exactly. This whole area that's around Silverstone basically is this area around the UK F1 track. Towns like Milton Keynes, they are the sort of hub for a lot of these teams, and Red Bull is no different. They won last year. Their team principal is Christian Horner. You may remember him as being the husband to Ginger Spice, Jerry Halliwell. They live in a castle. If you watch Drive to Survive, you've probably seen too much of him, arguably. And they have two drivers, a young gun and an old head. The young gun, Max Verstappen, won the championship last year. He is from the Netherlands. He is, I wouldn't say racing royalty, but his father is definitely, a famous driver in his own right. He drove an F1 himself. Max has sort of been bred in a test tube by his father to be a Formula One champion, and it worked out.
So I guess was also an accomplished driver as well. Literally brought up from birth to be an F1 contender.
And Max is a somewhat divisive figure, perhaps because of the spotlight that's been shone on him as well. He's 25 years old, so he's not the sort of super young buck he was before, but he's an incredibly talented driver. He, has his shoulders out, is fair to say. He's a tough driver to overtake. He's incredibly talented. We have now seen that he has also got a cool head, and it's going to take a very special driver to beat him, or a very special car, or a combination of the two. That's Max Verstappen. He is currently paired up with Sergio Perez, who is sort of a jobber of the F1 world. He has sort of jumped from team to team over the years, very nearly lost his race seat entirely, except for a great end to the season 2 years ago, which ended up netting him the second seat at Red Bull. He is Mexican. He came third last year, which arguably he should have been set up for second, but he'll probably be wanting to improve that this year. He's 33, which makes him one of the older folks on the grid, but still feel like there's a couple of years left in him. His name is Sergio Perez, but you may also hear him called Checo, which is a nickname that he has.
All right, let's move on, Rob.
Yeah, so last year's constructors runner-up was Ferrari. Ferrari are the most iconic team in Formula One, and for a long time would sometimes make the argument that they were F1 during some of the fights over the future of F1 that sort of raged throughout the 2000s. Ferrari's history in F1 has been a bit more of a story of ups and downs. There have been times the squad was very, very strong, as you might expect, but there have also been long dry spells. However, its sort of modern history is defined by its run of championships with Michael Schumacher in the 1990s and the 2000s that sort of gave birth to this idea of like Ferrari as a enduring titan in F1 and an unbeatable team. And naturally, when that era has ended, it has never been so good again. And the delta between the expectations that were forged over the years and the results over the intervening 20 years has accounted for a lot of Sturm und Drang around Ferrari, and what we might say is a fair bit of disarray or a revolving door at Ferrari. They've run through a series of what we call team principals, the effectively the day-to-day managers and overseers of the race teams. They have run through several of those over the last few years, and heading into this season, they just released a longstanding team principal who was also a Ferrari lifer who came up through the technical ranks of the company, Mattia Binotto. His background was in engine development and power unit development. And with his departure, they brought in a new team principal, Frederick Vasseur, who is a team boss who's been around motorsports for years and was the team principal over at Alfa Romeo for a number of years, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Ferrari also finds itself at this moment without a technical chief because Binotto was, in addition to wearing the hat as team principal, he was their technical head. So the team is in a bit of a curious spot where usually like F1 teams are 2 or 3 headed monsters. You have the team principal, and then there's people who sort of head up whatever that team sees as its most important divisions. Usually it's like technology or engines or something like that. It might be strategy is someone they sort of point to as sort of the lead lieutenant under the team principal. But Vasseur doesn't have a technical boss right now, and that position remains vacant. Ferrari, as you might expect, tends to have it always has a red livery, except I think they ran a yellow one for a special event last year, which looked really, really cool, and it'd be neat to see it again. Like a lot of cars this year, the Ferrari's a little less red than it has been before. There's sort of a wave of black cars on the grid, and if I'm not mistaken, this is in part because paint costs weight, and the natural color of an F1 car is black from the carbon fiber that sort of forms the shell of the body, and if you don't paint it, you have a lighter car. And so suddenly a lot of teams have discovered that black does indeed go with everything. And so the Ferrari is, yes, it's an iconic red car with an awful lot of swooping black over its elements. It is also its own engine manufacturer. It is based, as again, out of Italy. And this is, making it one of the few teams that is not based in that sort of F1 cottage industry in the UK, which is in part why Ferrari sometimes faces an uphill struggle convincing people to move out to Maranello in Modena. So last year they finished second, but they did find themselves kind of in a shootout with a Mercedes team that really started the year with a very bad car. And this is probably why they fired their team principal at the end of the year. In addition to reliability issues, there were just a lot of races over the past few years where Ferrari seemed to snatch like defeat, if not from the jaws of victory, at least from the jaws of an advantageous finish or an advantageous position.
A less embarrassing defeat, maybe.
Yeah, and the last straw was probably a race in Brazil where they would sometimes make inexplicable calls trying to seek advantage where there was just simply none to be had. And that really got under the skin of both of their drivers, who are fairly young and very talented, and also over the course of last year would sometimes be heard arguing rather forcefully or pleading with the Ferrari pit wall where they're getting radio instructions and race strategies being called, sometimes begging for them to make better decisions or begging the Ferrari pit wall to just stop wrecking their race as much. They are led by Charles Leclerc. He is even though a lot of F1 drivers live in Monaco for a variety of reasons, taxes, Charles is the rare F1 driver who is a Monegasque native. He is also he was identified early as a phenomenal talent in F1, came up through that Alfa Romeo team, set the world on fire over there, and was quickly promoted to the Ferrari team. He is just 25, and in 2019, in sort of a leap of faith with him or a real commitment by the team to show that he was their future, they signed him to what then seemed like it would be an endless 5-year contract. It seemed like, boy, this is, they've set their entire era around him. Well, at the end of next year, we'll see what becomes of him.
Was it only 5? In my head, it was 8, but that's probably just because 5 seems ridiculous.
Yeah. In 2019, 2024 seemed like a long way away, and now it's like he's through half that contract. In addition, he is paired with, also signed up through the 2024 season, Carlos Sainz Jr., a Spanish driver who is also sort of racing royalty. His father is a renowned rally driver and sort of a renowned national figure in Spain. He is 28 and is not seen as Leclerc is certainly seen as the lead driver, but Sainz has flashes of enough talent that he can give him a real run for his money. And right now, I think both drivers, their primary opponent has been the misfortune that tends to surround Ferrari.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on to Mercedes. They are, of course, a German team, though their base is again in the UK. The Mercedes name first entered F1 in 1954, and in recent years they have dominated. Until 2021, Mercedes had won the previous 7 drivers and constructors championships. Last year, though, was the first time since then that we had really seen them stumble, taking 3rd place in the constructors. But count them out at your peril. They've got some of the best talent in the game and are constantly innovating. If you look closely at their car, you'll see that it lacks the bulbous side pods that flank the driver on the other cars, which, when that design debuted last year, blew everyone away. It was like, you can't do that. Where is the side pods? Of course, it remains to be seen whether they have fixed last year's gremlins and can fight at the top again. They were one of the teams who had a particularly bad time with porpoising, or the severe oscillations caused by some of the new aerodynamic regulations that caused back injuries to at least one of their drivers. So be on the lookout for that too. Their livery is black with some, as Rob mentioned, or maybe a lot of exposed carbon fiber, which I think is just cool. They do make their own engine. Their team principal is a guy named Toto Wolff, a very large Austrian man who likes lifting weights. And yes, he does sound like the Terminator. Their drivers are George Russell from the UK. He's 25 years old. Last year was his first with Mercedes, having been tempered in the fires of, shall we say, an underperforming team for a few years. And he really stepped up, placing 4th in the Drivers' Championship ahead of his veteran teammate. He's had a few nicknames over the years, Mr. Saturday for his stellar qualifying abilities and Mr. Consistency for his string of top 5 finishes last year in a car that was decidedly not what we had come to expect from a Mercedes.
Yeah.
Sir Lewis Hamilton is his teammate. He is also British. Last year, he placed 6th in the Drivers' Championship, and at 38 years old, is one of F1's grizzled ancients, and also one of the sport's few rags to riches stories, and the only black driver in the history of the sport. He is the current Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, etc. of Formula One, having claimed a record-tying 7 championships and only narrowly missed out on a few more. He is the most outspoken driver when it comes to political causes, and is generally a good dude. And as a driver, it is very rare to see him make a mistake. So that is Mercedes. Up next is Alpine, a French team with French drivers. It's spelled like Alpine. And Alpine is the racing brand of French car manufacturer Renault. They have been pretty up and down since they re-entered the sport in 2016, but last year they had a new team principal, a Romanian-American named Otmar Safnauer, who previously headed one of the more cash-strapped F1 teams and kept it punching above its weight, so he knows what he's doing. 4th place in the Constructors' Championship was great for them last year, so we'll see if they can repeat or improve. Their livery is blue and pink. They have a Renault engine. And they are also based in the UK. Both their drivers are French, and both have faced their fair share of adversity. Esteban Ocon is 26 years old. Last year, he placed 8th in the Drivers' Championship, and like Lewis Hamilton, had relatively humble beginnings. His parents selling their house and moving into a motorhome to bring him around to go-karting events, which is how most of these guys get their start. At the end of the 2018 season, Ocon was dropped by his team when a billionaire bought it and installed his son as a driver. That is a team we will get to in a minute. But he was brought back by Renault a year later. He has clashed with teammates in the past, so it'll be interesting to see how he fares with his fellow Frenchman, who is new to the team. And that Frenchman is Pierre Gasly, 27 years old. He placed 14th last year. Like Ocon, he has had an up and down and back up career. He was promoted to the Red Bull team after barely a year in the sport to be Max Verstappen's teammate, and no surprise, didn't exactly match up to him. Red Bull then kicked him out in the middle of the season, and at the following race, a childhood friend of his and Formula 2 racer was killed in a crash in Belgium just before Pierre was going to race there. However, he stayed in the sport and really turned things around, doing well enough to catch Alpine's eye. So I like Pierre. Hope he does well this year. Next up, Danny.
Oh, I'm back up. Back to the UK for McLaren. Another team that is sort of known in, I feel like this is a racing manufacturer or car manufacturer that's known in racing circuits and maybe like high class sort of like, you know, what do you call them, sports car kind of worlds, but isn't necessarily one that if you're not into cars, you mightn't know them.
I only knew them because going around the middle school was that Mr. Bean drove a McLaren F1. What's that?
What?
Go look it up. Yeah, he's a big car head.
Wait,
you mean in real life, Rowan Atkinson did, or
Rowan Atkinson owns a McLaren F1.
Okay.
Which is it's a model of car. He doesn't own an F1 car.
Oh, I thought you meant that he owned, because Mr. Bean used to drive around that little, was it a Robin Reliant? No, that was Del Boy. That he used to drive. Oh no, he didn't. He drove a Bug, and there was another 3-wheeled car that he'd make tip over. You know, just check out our Mr. Bean podcast if you want more on that. The McLaren livery is arguably the easiest one to spot. It is the high-vis jacket of the grid. It is orange, although this year, once again, they have opted to have a lot of black on it, or just opted to not have paint on it. Some nice little teal highlights on there as well. What do they like to call McLaren again? What do they say? It's not orange, it's Papaya, sorry, that's the color they go for.
The fact we all know that,
I know,
just demonstrates how successful they've been at
marketing.
Like branding around that. They're always like, we're the papaya team.
I don't
and
know.
I'm like,
what's a
yeah,
is it a fruit? Is it a?
That's papaya.
Is it? Yeah, I know. It's like, is it a fruit? It's papaya fruit.
It is a fruit.
Yeah,
yes.
It is a fruit. Okay, yeah. No, orange is also a fruit. Whatever. Who cares? Engine. Mercedes engine in this thing. They're based in the UK. Their team principal is Andrea Stella. He's new, not to be confused with the previous team principal, Andreas Seidel. This is a different person. Andrea Stella, I believe, he's been at McLaren for a number of years. He kind of came up through the Ferrari ranks. But he has basically taken over as team principal, although the CEO of McLaren, Zach Brown, a sort of a larger-than-life American chap, is often seen on the grid and in with the engineers a lot as well. So he sort of ends up cutting quite a large figure in the story of McLaren on any given race weekend. McLaren did pretty well last year. They came in 5th. Although the story of McLaren has been very much one of shuffling the deck and trying to break into the top half of the Constructors' Championships. If you were watching Drive to Survive, you would have noticed just how much or how often they had swapped their drivers and tried different combinations of drivers. And this year sees another bit of a swap from what was their last project with Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris. Lando Norris stays around. He's another one of these young drivers. He's 23 now, though, so not as young as they used to be. Time makes fool of us all. Lando is British. He came 7th last year. He was sort of, during the COVID years, known as the guy who got all the other drivers into streaming. In previous years, he was a bit more sort of lad about town, meme lord, fun on the internet. Last year, he kind of, I would say, took himself a little bit more seriously. And he kind of had to, because he had a driver beside him in Daniel Ricciardo who, doesn't have a seat this year, but was a very well-liked and a very talented driver. Lando ended up blowing him out of the water last year and is now definitely the number one driver because his teammate, Oscar Piastri, is new to the sport somewhat. Last year he was a reserve and a test driver. This year he's finally gotten his rookie drive. Piastri is no stranger to winning. He won the Formula 3 championship. He won the Formula 2 championship. And while he's a rookie this year, he'll definitely be fighting to get points and fighting to beat Lando. He's an Australian, which Ricciardo was as well. So I guess there's, like for like there. He's 21, which is on the younger edge, but probably old for a rookie in modern years, as we've had a lot of young drivers. And yeah, all eyes on him. I think he was very much a driver that somebody was going to pick up given his talents. But if you want to know all about the politics that went into getting into a McLaren, you can listen to about 20 of last year's podcasts. It was quite a long story.
All right. Next up, Alfa Romeo, Rob.
Yeah, so Alfa Romeo, a Swiss team based and actually does build their car out of Switzerland, so a bit like Ferrari there in terms of not being part of the F1 microclimate in the UK. They are let's put this. So they used to be a team called Sauber, and for a long time they were always sort of the also-rans of F1. Like, you were in there sort of, way to go, Sauber, like giving it a shot, giving it their all, under-resourced. Historically a good eye for talent at this team, and seeing what talent could do with an underwhelming car year after year. A lot of exciting drivers came through Sauber in its day, and they've continued to come through Alfa Romeo. This year, Alfa Romeo's car is the C43. Its livery is a bit like Ferrari, red and black, but a lot more black and really just a splash of red across the back. And they also are in a weird place. We alluded to with Ferrari. So Ferrari hired their new team principal basically out of Alfa Romeo, because Alfa Romeo in recent years almost turned into a Ferrari B team. They were a customer team that was really dependent on Ferrari for engines, and there were a lot of ties between the two organizations. And they haven't really replaced Frederic Vasseur over at Alfa Romeo. Drew flagged that they have a new team representative, Alessandro Aluni Bravi, and the only way I can describe him is that he looks like Jeff Goldblum, and like a very Euro chic Jeff Goldblum. And honestly, if Wes Anderson were making a F1 movie, this character is straight out of that film, 100%.
Yeah. Who's the guy who directed that bad Ghostbusters movie?
Was that Feige?
It was, yeah. He looks like Feige a bit too, doesn't he?
He does. So Bravi is. It's kind of hard to know what to expect with a guy with a title this nebulous, because pointedly he has not taken the team principal role, and his background is kind of all over the place. Most of his career, he has been a lawyer who has worked in motorsports talent management and in corporate law around people who handle things like TV rights for racing series. But he did do managerial work in feeder series for F1, so he does know his way around a paddock. But just most of his career has been doing work with contract law and such, and representing drivers. In terms of I'll introduce these guys because we don't fully know who is going to be running things. Xavi Pujolar is their track engineer, effectively their chief engineer for the race weekends, and Beat Zender is their sporting director, which could be more of the tactical role. It's unclear as to who is going to be making calls during races or how it's all going to work. And yeah, Danny.
I was just about to say, is this person's name is Beat Zender? Beat Zender. This is now a good moment maybe to just acknowledge for all the new F1 fans that when you join F1, you have to spin a wheel and it gives you a random weird name. Because in no other sport do you have the sort of, even as somebody who grew up in Europe, I feel like the people who end up in F1 somehow are the people with the just weirdest name in their classroom every single time. Beat Zender.
I did hesitate. I was like, did I paste something in wrong? But apparently he's an old Sauber hand.
Were you Googling new EDM acts and then accidentally pasted them into your document?
Anyway, so they're gonna have to pull whoever is running the show over there is gonna have to pull some tricks because they finished sixth place, but a distant sixth from McLaren. They were about 104 points behind the Papaya team, and that's a pretty deep hole. They are led by Valtteri Bottas, who was he's a Finnish driver who last year placed 10th. He's 33 years old, so he's becoming one of the old guard for sure. For a long time, he was partnered with Lewis Hamilton over at Mercedes, and in that time, he was sort of kept on one-year contracts year after year. It was very Dread Pirate Roberts type stuff, and never quite managed to give Hamilton much of a run for his championship money. He is paired by Guan Yu Zhou, who is a Chinese driver who finished in 18th place last year, but he did have some pretty horrific luck with mechanical reliability and crashes. He is 23 years old, and this is very much sort of a prove-it year for him. Certainly one of the things that led to him being promoted to a race seat was that there was a lot of interest in getting a Chinese driver onto the grid. Apparently, like Alfa Romeo did not find that had as much of an impact on their sales and marketing in China as they had hoped. And all of that is all those considerations are about to change quite a bit anyway, because Alfa Romeo is really not what it used to be. They are more interesting right now for what they're about to become. So in 2026, Audi is going to take over this team. They are going to field a car under their own name, a car designed and built by the German auto manufacturer. But this is the last season, I think, with it being called Alfa Romeo, and Audi resources are being thrown into the team, which, as I alluded to, has been underfunded for a long time. It is now being run by ex-McLaren team boss Andreas Seidel. So Alfa Romeo is in a transitional point in some ways. I'm sure they want to do well, and certainly both these drivers are auditioning for their seat at the table for the future of this team as all these new resources arrive. But really, Alfa Romeo is a team that's going to become a lot more relevant and interesting in a few years. But right now, they're kind of just waiting for the new era and the new owner to arrive.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impressive that they did so well last year, but it does feel like a transition time. So
yeah,
who knows?
See how they do.
Next up, Aston Martin, Rob.
Yeah, so they finished. I forget how this was decided. It must have just been race finishes, but they were tied in points with Alfa Romeo. So again, they were like 100 points behind McLaren. And this was a bit of a disappointing campaign for Aston Martin. This year, they are fielding the AMR 23, and their livery is sort of a iridescent turquoise green. They run a Mercedes power unit, and they are, of course, based out of the UK. And as we alluded to with names, their team principal is Mike Crack. And he took over after Otmar Safnauer departed. Additionally, there's an odd note, and this is kind of, I include this not because you need to know it as you get in F1, but this is an example of how things work. They also had a longtime technical chief, Andrew Green, who had ties going back to teams called Jordan, BAR, very old F1 teams. And he has been with this team since it was called Force India in 2010. So he's been there for 12, 13 years, a lifetime in F1 terms. And he has now stepped away to go do work at Aston Martin Performance Technologies. There's just one little problem is as technical chief, this guy commanded a huge salary at Aston Martin. And nobody knows what Aston Martin Performance Technologies really does. And so...
Oh, you're kidding me.
And so... there's going to be an issue, and maybe they'll all be fine, but if they can't prove that this guy's job doesn't touch the car at all, his salary, which is, again, pretty big, gets counted against their spending cap. And so they will have a lot less money to spend. But they can't really... apparently right now, it is not yet... they don't have a clear case for, what he is doing that is not the Aston Martin F1 program. So keep an eye on that. But this is kind of the weird. All F1 teams kind of have to do like some weird shell games around accounting with the cost cap, and this is an example of it. Like, no surprise, like a long time, technical lead in F1. You've been doing this career for a while. The season's 23 races. People are getting tired. Burnout in F1 is a huge issue. I have no doubt he wanted to step away from the team, but they got to prove he stepped all the way away, or that's going to cause some problems for the team. He's been replaced by a guy named Dan Fallows, who used to be pretty highly placed at Red Bull, and they didn't let him come join the team after he signed his contract, and instead forced him to sit out the rest of his Red Bull contract.
Oh, you're kidding.
In 2021. So wow. they did not do the homie thing that like McLaren did with Seidel, where it's like, go on, start your new life. No, Red Bull kept him in there. Now, 2021 was a shootout for the championship, but again, that's how cutthroat it gets. This year, they've got an interesting driver lineup. So they are led by Fernando Alonso, a very accomplished Spanish driver. Last year, he finished 9th in the championship. He is now the old guy. He is 41 years old. He is paired with Lance Stroll, a Canadian driver who last year finished 15th, and he is just 24 years old. But notably, he is also the son of Lawrence Stroll, a billionaire who used to sponsor Lance's sort of racing ambitions and has since bought the entire team and like sort of created the partnership with Aston Martin. And I guess here's my gloss on Aston. It's kind of two ways you can look at it. If you wanted to like really be cynical and negative, you could say that even by F1 standards, the whole team's a monument to ego and arrogance. Lance Stroll is the rich kid who got his dad to buy a racing team after sustaining his career for years. His father got bit by the F1 bug and started to think that he could do what he did in the corporate world. He was going to oversee a turnaround, transform a company through his insight, force of will, and resources. And now their star driver is like the ultimate F1 prima donna, a guy who has sort of maneuvered his way into losing situations since the moment he gained mastery over his own destiny as a two-time Formula One champion. The flip side is that Aston Martin is built on the foundation of a team that always punched above its weight as Force India, but never had resources and stability to grow into a real credible like podium challenger. And now you have the billionaire who has come in and supplied it with a lot of resources, tied it to a legendary sports car manufacturer, and has invested a ton of money in developing its headquarters and physical resources, so it can be have all the modern things an F1 team needs for R&D and parts fabrication. And then, this could be a great story. It's the twilight of Fernando Alonso's F1 career, and he's maybe one of the best drivers of his generation, and he's here to shape a team and shepherd it into a new era.
And to the point on the son in question, Lance Stroll has proved himself to be maybe not the most amazing driver, but certainly capable of beating his teammate too.
We've seen fail sons in F1. Lance is not that.
Yeah, well said. All right, well, next up is Haas. Haas is America's only F1 team, though again, they are based in the UK. They sort of shook things up when they entered the sport in 2016 because they operated as lean as possible within the F1 rules, which do state that certain parts must be made by the team while others can be purchased. So to keep costs down, Haas purchased as many parts as they could and outsourced a lot of their production, which is weird because
turned
Haas
up at Costco with a credit card and just like
you ever buy a kit
everything.
airplane?
Yeah.
It's weird. It struck me as odd because Haas, their owner Gene Haas, is a businessman who owns a company that makes like builder robots, like CNC machines that make physical goods, but yet they outsource their production to like Dallara in Italy. It's weird.
Couldn't have built a CNC that a big robot that makes F1 cars. Just
go buy a 3D printer, man.
Yeah, print them out.
This, led to some criticism of them just kind of being a copy of the Ferrari a lot of the time, which is who provides their engine. But it is within the rules. If you've seen Drive to Survive, you'll no doubt be familiar with team principal Günther Steiner, the potty-mouthed Italian who may or may not be good at his job. You'll probably also be familiar with their drivers, Kevin Magnussen, a 30-year-old Dane who is a hard racer and even harder on glass doors. And Nico Hülkenberg, a 35-year-old German who is new to the team this year after a 2-year hiatus from F1. And as children in a Microsoft store love to remind us in Drive to Survive, in 181 races, has never once been on the podium.
Drew is never going to let him forget about that.
I forgot he was back until you said that.
Yeah, Nico's back. Amazing. In fairness, he did also have two drives last year? One drive last year? He
subbed in 2 races last year for Sebastian Vettel at Aston Martin, who was ill with COVID. But this is the first time that Magnussen and Hülkenberg have been on the team together, a fact that is especially funny if you're familiar with the infamous clip where, after an on-track scuffle, Hülkenberg approached Magnussen during an on-camera interview, called him an unsporting driver, to which Magnussen immediately replied with a diplomatic, "Suck my balls."
Which is even funnier when you consider English is neither of their first languages. For some reason, that tickles me even more. That's the pejorative he went for. It's perfect.
It's just off the cuff. It's great. I will include a link to that in the show notes. Their livery is white and black. Their engine is Ferrari. Last year they placed 8th in the Constructors' Championship. Kevin Magnussen placed 13th, and Nico Hülkenberg technically placed 22nd with his substitution duties. But he is new to the team. That is Haas. Next one is AlphaTauri, which is also a weird one. They're sort of a sister team to Red Bull because they are owned by the same company, but per the Formula One rules, they aren't allowed to share any technical data. Also, they are an Italian team based in Italy, unlike the Austrian team based in the UK. And AlphaTauri, as I'm sure everyone knows, is Red Bull's fashion brand.
Oh, yeah. Who amongst us isn't wearing a pair of AlphaTauri underwears right now?
Mm-hmm. Good luck getting them to ship to the US. I've tried.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure anyone has actually purchased anything from AlphaTauri. There's a lot of weird.
Well, they also have pretty strict no fatties
going on
rule with their sizing.
That's true.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Even I feel like the large is probably skin tight as well because then they got all those beautiful Italian boys. They used to be called Toro Rosso, right, which was Italian for Red Bull, but then they only recently changed to this name because they wanted to sell some pants. I don't know.
Yeah. Like Red Bull,
Drew used to be able to say Scuderia Toro Rosso with a ton of mustard on it every race in those days.
You mean a Scuderia Toro Rosso?
Beautiful.
Yeah,
I feel like shit, just want it back.
I know. I want that livery back, man. Oh, so good. They use the Red Bull Honda engine. Their livery is kind of a dark navy and white. Their team principal is a guy named Franz Tost. Last year they placed 9th in the Constructors' Championship, and their drivers are number 1, Yuki Tsunoda, a 22-year-old Japanese driver who last year placed 17th. He's the shortest driver on the grid at 5'2". And when asked his favorite thing about F1, responded, "The food in the hospitality suites." Drive to Survive also taught us that he hates physical training, but loves poop jokes, so I'm a big Yuki fan. He also has he had sort of a crashy start to his F1 career, but reined it in last year. Although I can't help but think, if he isn't great this year, it might be his last. Which will be tough because his teammate is Nick de Vries, a 28-year-old rookie from the Netherlands. He has previously won championships in Formula 2 and Formula E. Last year, he filled in for an injured driver on the Williams team and absolutely wiped the floor with his teammate.
Yeah.
Which definitely raised some eyebrows and no doubt contributed to him being sought after for this year. So very anxious to see how old Nick does this year. And last up, Danny.
Almost done. Yeah, Williams, the runt of the litter. Let's just come out and say it. Williams have had an awful couple of years. They are racing royalty based in the UK. Mercedes engine, blue car. But don't worry about the color. You'll always notice it because it's at the back. They've had a rough, decade, let's say, at this stage under the family ownership of the Williams family and under Dorrington Capital, who purchased them a number of years ago. Last year seemed like it was very much a phone it in year. We're hoping next year will be better type of situation. They come equipped with a new team principal, who we all know from Valtteri. This is James from the Mercedes engineering wall. James Vowles, who is now the team principal over there. Last year they placed 10th. This year they will be aiming for 9th. Anything else would be a bonus, I'd say. And they come equipped with two pretty decent drivers. Alexander Albon, who is a Thai British national. He drives under the Thailand flag. He likes to color his hair. He is a very likable guy. He might be the most likable guy.
It is straight platinum this year. It looks awesome.
Yeah, Alex has had I feel like his confidence in the past, he's not a freshman anymore. Is the vibe I got from Alex. Alex now looks good, wears good clothes. He's got a girlfriend. They're out there they're
he's got no appendix.
Couple. He's got right. He's lost better for aerodynamics, better for weight. And which is great because Alex had a real rough time of it. He lost his seat in dramatic fashion at Red Bull. He sat he sat the year previous out until he got his race seat at Williams again last year. And he's been great at Williams. Maybe it's a good fit, having basically absolutely no expectations whatsoever, and a teammate who's a Canadian lemon. But this year he doesn't have that benefit. Logan Sargent is in, who sounds like an American, and you'll be happy to know is in fact an American. Logan Sargent this is his first year in the sport. He's 22 years old. I talked before about Nick de Vries coming into the sport, who had done really well in previous feeder series. Logan Sargent's kind of done all right. He was 4th in British Formula 4. He was 3rd in F3. I think he was 4th in F2. So he's definitely an accomplished driver, but he is not the creme de la creme. He is, in fact, though, the first American driver we've had in a while. Am I being
Since
crazy?
Alexander Rossi in 2016 or something.
All right, yeah. So that's exciting. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how fast Logan Sargent picks up F1. I think we'll know the cut of his jib pretty soon once he steps into it. And he is the final driver that we're going to talk about today. Although it is worth mentioning that the chances are we will have more than 20 drivers hitting the grid next year, especially in the days we find ourselves in. Often there are drivers who are struck down by COVID or other illnesses. Sometimes they get injured in crashes, in fact. Sometimes they're just testing out a rookie. So these are the sort of 20 drivers you'll see the most of, but there might be some other faces popping up here and there over the course of the season.
Right on. Well, those are your teams and drivers. Let's get into more of the details of the sport, starting with the horses of chrome that these gladiators ride. Rob, tell us about the car.
Yeah, so F1 cars are powered by a V6 turbo hybrid system. We'll use the term engine and power unit interchangeably for a lot of the year, but technically the internal combustion engine is only one component on what is a fairly modular power unit at this point. We'll get into that in just a second. F1 engines are generally produce about 1,000 brake horsepower. And for the sake of comparison, your basic lowest trim level Honda Accord has 192 brake horsepower. A new Corvette just rolled this out. The new C8 Z06 produces 670 brake horsepower, but this is crucial, it weighs 3,700 pounds. An F1 car with that 1,000 brake horsepower weighs in at less than 1,800 pounds. So the power to weight ratio is truly absurd. Here's something else that's absurd. 20 or 30 years ago, F1 cars were running monstrous V10 engines. A decade ago, they were running V8s. When they were cut down to V6s, it really seemed unlikely that they would ever be as fast as they were in their heyday, when they were just trumpets of pipes, just like, like thrusting out in every direction to vent these engines. But the V6 turbo engines they run are augmented by a hybrid system that recovers waste energy from braking and exhaust, much as, any hybrid car on the road does today. And that charges up a battery that accounts for about a third of the max power of the engine. As impressive as that system is, this entire engine, the power unit, it's a lot of systems working together, and it's very complicated and delicate. And the V6 hybrid era has to date been sort of defined by who are the engine haves and have-nots. This for a long time was and is exacerbated by the rules that give engines of today a much harder job than their predecessors. F1 teams are supposed to get through the season using just 3 power units. But the component parts wear out unevenly, and few teams can really hit the 3 power unit limit. So inevitably, they start taking massive penalties later in the year because their engines are worn out. Like, I think every time you change one of these components, it's a 10-place grid penalty. And since they'll usually swap out a few at a time or just like roll in a whole new power unit, you will hear teams taking 30-place grid penalties or something like that in a car that only has in a field that only has 20 cars. So that actually ends up like working out because so many people take these penalties that at times they become almost meaningless. Plus, a fresh engine does produce more power than a worn-out one, so you tend to see new engines being brought out for tracks that involve a lot of flat-out running. F1 does have an engine freeze running to 2026. And 2026, we'll get into this, I'm sure, a bit more as the season unfolds, but 2026 is like new rules, new F1. A whole bunch of things are changing in 2026. That's what's kind of a magic date in F1. And to free up development resources for the power units of that era, they've slowly rolled in an engine freeze where they can't continue to develop and modify the engines these teams are running. Nobody can design new ones. The 4 companies that produce engines are Ferrari, Honda, Red Bull Powertrains, and Renault, or we'll call them Alpine, and Mercedes. That may change come 2026, but ultimately all these engines are kind of under glass right now, and they're still tinkering with them, but what you don't have is kind of what defined the sport 4 or 5 years ago, where you had wildly different engines with wildly different characteristics. They're trying to sort of converge them in a process called homologation, which you hear a lot across all motor racing. I guess the next thing we'll talk about, because you're going to hear this come up a lot, is a system called DRS. We'll talk about all the aerodynamics of F1 in just a second, but DRS is a bit of an odd one in F1. On every track, there are these things called DRS zones, and at DRS zones, you are allowed, if you are within a second of the car ahead of you, to activate DRS, the drag reduction system, which is a very fancy name for opening up a flap like a letterbox on your rear wing. And, the rear wing is angled to catch a lot of air and press the car down. When DRS activates, that wing snaps up and becomes just a thin little blade slicing through the air, and all that downforce, but crucially, all the drag it generates also goes away. And so suddenly cars are much more like streamlined through the air, and it aids in overtaking. And boy, do they need help overtaking in F1, because the reason F1 cars are able to run so fast around tracks and why they were able to get faster even as engines appeared to get like less powerful for a while is because for years, they had really intricate front and rear wings that had all sorts of like weird little vanes and struts on them that just generated a ton of what's called aerodynamic grip. So the car is just being pressed into the road and held there, so you corner faster, turn more sharply, etc. And those really sophisticated wings, which were these really Baroque things when you saw pictures of them, they were at their best when racing in clear air. When driving in the turbulent wash left behind by, say, another race car, those wings tended to underperform, meaning that as you tried to close in on another driver to pass them, your car kind of got worse and worse. And so passing for a long time in F1 was just brutally difficult because, so much of what they were built around in terms of performance would go away when it came time to try and pass. To fix this, aerodynamic rules were radically simplified. So basically all those like really complicated wings and winglets and the vanes, all that was sort of tossed. And now if you look at the front and rear wing of an F1 car today, they're pretty simple structures. When you think of a wing, you probably think of what you will see on an F1 car, which didn't used to be the case. It used to be, it was like the Gillette Mach 12 or whatever was the equivalent of what these things looked like.
It looked like a 2006 Alienware PC, just like ridiculous plastic curves everywhere. And that's only a recent change. That was last year, right? It's funny you mentioning 2026 because like 2022 was the year we were looking forward to for a couple of years there when the new regs came in.
So to give some downforce back, teams were allowed to use what's called ground effect aerodynamics, where they use the air passing under the car to create like a little low pressure area under the car, which effectively sucks the car to the ground. These new rules were really tricky for some teams. Drew alluded to something called porpoising, which is that airflow under the car would stall out, and a bit like I don't know, when you're driving on the highway and you have the window open a crack and you hear the air go like fit, 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 and it makes that weird, awful flapping noise as sort of the air stalls over the airflow. That was happening under these cars, and it was causing them to, jostle incredibly and almost bounce under high speed. When you saw in-car camera views, it was wild and almost dangerous for some teams. Mercedes was the worst afflicted by this, but Ferrari had real troubles with it as well. Teams like Red Bull, whose competitive edge for years has been that they have maybe the greatest aerodynamicist and car designer in F1 history, in Adrian Newey, they nailed the design requirements of the 2022 car and pretty much sailed to a victory. So we will see what happens in chassis and aero this year, but that's kind of the landscape we're operating in. Ironically, the simplified aero rules have also meant that DRS, which used to be incredibly important, some drivers say it's a little less so now, that it has a less tangible impact than it used to.
I think it still gives around a 12 mile an hour boost in average.
And crucially, it doesn't need to do as much because while, the cars aren't sticking to each other, the amount of like crazy turbulent air behind the cars has been fairly well reduced, or at least it's less in the cars' faces and more sort of spat up into the sky, which has meant that the cars have been driving closer in last year more so than previous years.
So the other thing that contributes to the grip of a car, we talked about aerodynamic grip, but then there's mechanical grip, which is the suspension of the car. But the suspension is, of course, connected to the tires. And tires, you would think this is a simple thing, but it ends up being one of the more complicated parts of F1. And F1's tire manufacturer, Pirelli, does not make it easy on us.
Let's talk about C0s, Rob.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Okay.
I actually thought you guys were joking when you mentioned this.
We mentioned this, yeah.
So when you're talking about racing tires, all F1 cars run on slick tires in dry weather. So they're just like perfect like round like tires, no tread on them at all.
F1 tires are round. You heard it here first.
Yeah. So the thing that makes a tire grippier in general is that it's a little bit softer. Intuitively you can think of it as like sort of gripping the track a little bit, just like giving a little smooch because it's a little softer, a little gummier.
Like some Air Jordans, just giving you a little bit of grip there.
But softness is in tension with durability. A harder tire can run longer on a track surface and maintain performance, whereas generally a softer tire will wear out much, much faster. And you will start to see you will start to see like it lose performance. This is made more complicated by the fact that F1 races in a variety of places with really different track conditions and track surfaces. To solve this problem, Pirelli has generally made 5 compounds of tire. C1 through C5. C1, keep this in your head, C1 is the hardest tire. C5 is the softest.
I remember
This
because
year-
a 5 looks like an S, which is soft.
There
That's
you go.
That's a helpful device.
Yeah.
This year, Pirelli have given us a precious gift, which is the C0.
C0.
So they looked upon their range of tires, because you can only send 3 tires to a track for that Grand Prix weekend, in addition to the wet weather tires. We'll get to those in a second. And they decided they didn't quite have the range of hardness and softness that they would like. And by the way, every race weekend, the 3 tires, whatever their actual compounds are called, are all gauged relatively to each other. There's the hard, medium, and soft tire. And that's what you're going to be hearing referred to throughout the race weekend. Pirelli looked at this range of tires and decided they needed a new tire to sort of cover a gap in the range. And so they created...
We can go harder, they thought.
No. They thought... You clarified this, because I
right.
thought the C0 was the new tire.
We're hard enough, but we can go slightly less hard.
It could be more pleasing.
Yes.
So they developed a new C1 tire, which is generally going to be their hardest tire, but the old C1 is now the C0, which is going to be reserved for tracks with sort of the fastest and hardest wearing conditions, so where you're going to really want a tire that can hold up under those conditions. Tires, tires become really important in light of tire strategy. In an F1 race, you have if the weather is dry, you have to use 2 of those compounds during the race, and so you're gonna have to stop. Anyway, they've tuned the tires to ensure that they degrade in ways that are interesting for the purposes of the sport.
yes.
And so, at least once, frequently a couple or a few times in an F1 race, cars will have to pit to change tires. There is and this is where things get really fraught, because track position is still paramount in F1. There is a pit lane speed limit. Not all pit lanes are the same. Some are very slow. And so when you pull in, you have to what is it, like it's 45-mile speed limit? It's really low.
And it's not, that's also different in some tracks.
Yeah, but like these cars basically crawl down the pits. And so in addition to the time you spend stopped, you spend a lot of time driving at like residential street speeds almost in pit lane. You hit your pit box. And F1 teams, if you want to say, like, this is part of the show, these are some of the most, like, well-drilled teams that you can imagine. They can change all 4 tires on a car in 2 seconds. There was a time we were seeing teams break the 2-second mark and start to edge up on 1.9 because, one of the things they developed is that even the wheel guns that loosen the nut, even those are computerized and effectively know when their job is done and can send a go code to when the car can be released. So the pit stops, races really hinge on these because running clear air is such an advantage. So timing it well, releasing the car into a good position on in traffic is crucially important. And the other thing that can play real havoc with all this is the weather. F1 runs in the rain. If it is raining, unless it is unsafe, F1 will run. For light rain conditions, they have what's called the intermediate tire, which again, a round tire but with tread. A little light bit of tread to deal with a light bit of rain, and then they have a blue sidewall tire for a blue sidewalled tire, the full wet, for basically downpour conditions.
Which apparently this year, did you know about this? Has been tuned so that it should be able to perform better in worse rain, because they're trying to reduce the amount of times they need to bring the safety car out. Apparently, that's what I read.
How are they handling? Because this has been the issue. These tires are too good. F1 cars. This happened famously a couple years ago at a race in Belgium, Spa, where they diffuse the water that's on the track so efficiently that they create a fog bank. F1 cars, like as they race around a track, atomize the water that was there, and can, like, even in conditions where you're like, it's not raining, it hasn't been raining for hours, F1 cars will still be creating this like impermeable haze of just like water vapor with their tires, which has become oddly enough a real issue because it has made what seems like even lighter rains less safe than they were in the past because visibility just drops to nil.
That's a good point, because like the thing that red flags and brings out safety cars more than anything else is visibility. It's not, sometimes it's that somebody went off. Sometimes that's the inciting action, but certainly the part that stops the race, restarting when they're all bunched up as well, is that. So I wonder if they're trying to stop the spinning that sort of creates the necessity for the safety car. You know what I mean? Like cut it off at the pass. Who knows? We mightn't even get many races this year. You never know, but obviously it's something that they're having to deal with because it seems like we're getting. Yeah, who knows? Maybe this is a global warming thing. We got some pretty wet races in the past couple of years when they were wet.
Well, Danny, you just mentioned a few things. Flags and safety cars. Tell us about them.
I did. Yes, we got to talk about the rules. Rules are a big part of F1. Some rules are black and white. Some rules are grey. Lots of rules in F1 are grey. We'll talk about defending in a second. And there have also been some changes to the rules as well for all you F1 veterans. But first, let's cover the basics. Flags. You wave them. Your country's got one. They're cool. You play Unreal Tournament, you're capturing them. Everyone knows what flags are. Most of the flags in F1 are fairly basic. They follow a sort of a green light, yellow light, red light system. And then there are some other ones which you're probably not going to see that often. The basic ones are green, which are waved by the marshals on the side of the track, who are local people who are employed by the race circuit, often work multiple, they work an F1 race or maybe some other races during the year. They are
mostly volunteers.
Mostly volunteers, and they're responsible for waving these flags. There are also some LCD flags, if you will, up around the circuit as well. And also, many of these flags get displayed on the driver's little heads-up display on their race wheel as well. But that's what I mean when we're saying the flags are getting waved. That's who's waving them. Green means, hey, everyone's cool. Just keep raving. Keep driving. Have a good time. Red means you got to stop. The session's been stopped. Someone crashed really bad. The rain got real bad. Whatever it is, it's over. We're stopping. Come back to the pit lane. More often than not, you're going to see the yellow flags getting talked about. And yellow flags come in several different forms. There's a waved yellow, which is when they start waving the flag. And that means, hey, don't overtake here. There's something dangerous going on. Something happened. Maybe someone's crashed or parked to the side. Maybe there's a bit of debris. We're not sure what it is. But like, hey, you see a waved yellow flag? Chill out. You see two of them getting waved. That's a double yellow. There, you don't do any overtaking as well, but it means that there's probably a proper blockage on the track. So you really got to slow down in these sections. Keep your eyes open because these cars, as Drew and Rob said, they're traveling very, very fast, coming around these corners. They don't necessarily see what's there. So it's really important that they slow down ahead of seeing something, not just slow down when they see something. Then you also get a single stationary yellow, which is when they just hold the yellow up, and that means it's on the opposite end of the spectrum. It means, look, there's something's happened. It's off track, but you need to be aware of it. So no overtaking, but you don't necessarily need to slow down as much. Outside of that, you also have the blue flag, the dreaded blue flag. This basically means that you are a car who is going to be overtaken by somebody who is much, much further ahead in the race than you. Because F1 tracks or F1 races are very long, and because there is a difference in the speed of some of these cars, or different pit strategies, or different abilities of drivers, whatever it is, over the course of a race, you inevitably get to the point where the lead car starts to catch up with the back of the pack and will start to overtake some of the cars who are also racing, but who aren't racing them. The car who's in 20th isn't racing the car in first, so they don't want them racing and getting in each other's way and causing accidents and hazards. So basically, the car who is about to be overtaken gets waved a blue flag and says, basically, hey, look, someone's coming up behind you. You're not racing them. Get out of the way. And they have the impetus to get out of the way. They have to move off the racing line to let the other car go past. The blue flag doesn't mean, hey, someone's about to overtake you. It means get out of the way. Someone has to go on the racing line. So blue flags are very, very important. And unfortunately, the cars at the back of the grid are usually pretty well trained at seeing them and dealing with them. Then you have a bunch of other flags that you don't see very often at all. You have the black flag, which usually comes with a number on it, which means somebody's been disqualified. Chances are they've already been told over the radio anyway. Very rare. You have a black flag with an orange circle in the middle, often referred to as the meatball flag. This actually reared its head a little bit last year. It basically means there's a mechanical issue with the car and you need to come into the pits and get that sorted. Last year was because there was a couple of times where cars had a bit of debris that had not fully come off the car, but was sort of waving around in the wind. And these cars travel very, very fast. And if something comes off the car, even if it's just like bouncing along the road not very fast, the issue is that these cars are basically jet planes. So if they hit anything at speed, that little, in the case of what happened a number of years ago to Rubens Barrichello, just a little nut, a bolt rather, from the car is bouncing along the track. You hit that thing at 200 plus miles an hour, that's a missile that's hitting your head and it puts you in hospital, which happened to him.
Felipe Massa.
Sorry, it was Massa.
You got the wrong Brazilian
I said sorry.
Ferrari driver.
Yes. Yes, of course. Massa, who ended up being in hospital, went right through his helmet, but thankfully fully recovered. So that's the black with orange circle, the meatball flag. Then you have the half black, half white, which is kind of what you get before the black flag. It means you've been a bold boy. We rarely, if ever, see that one. The yellow and red striped one, which we often don't see very often, means that there is debris or oil on the track. And if the marshal is kind of rocking it side to side, that means there's an animal somewhere. Which I feel like it's hard to notice if somebody's... The waving of the flag, I can kind of imagine noticing that at speed. The rocking from side to side, I'm not so sure. But we've had instances of animals on track. We've had iguanas or something. We had some sort of lizard.
We had fans.
We've had fans on track. Protesters is often something. We had some at Silverstone last year. I'm not sure what they do with the flag if there's a fan on it. They probably just use the animal one for that because these protesters, they're just animals. The checkered flag, of course, you all know and love. It's a black and white checkered flag. That means the session is complete when the lead car crosses over that. It means everyone's on their last lap. And they are about to finish, regardless of if it is the last lap. So if you're a back marker and you've got your 2 laps behind the lead car and the lead car crosses over the finish line, that's your last lap. Then when you cross over that checkered flag, your session is also complete. And aside from the flags, you also have something called safety cars, which came up when we were talking about the weather stuff. A safety car is basically a car that comes out in the event of somewhere between the sort of yellow and red flag, when something has happened that is serious enough that they need to sort of slow everyone down and not have anyone racing, but not so serious that they need to bring all the cars into the pits, because then it's a lot of work to get them back on the grid, up to temperature, all this sort of stuff. So this car comes out and basically gets in front of the lead car. The rest of the cars close the gap, so there's a train, a sort of a conga line of F1 cars behind this non-F1 car, this sports car nonetheless, but slower moving car, and it basically shepherds them through the track safely. Whenever the
you
race...
also see a lot of people ask, like, why are they weaving back and forth behind the safety car, like driving back and forth, zigzagging, and that's to keep their tires warm. So if you see that, that's what's going on.
Exactly. They'll be braking.
You want your tire not to be too cold because you want it to be kind of tacky. So that's why they want to warm them.
Yes, especially in those
situations.
situations.
You can spin doing that.
Yes,
certainly
exactly.
Can.
Roman Grosjean. Not the worst crash he's had, but maybe the most embarrassing. Yes, and it's especially important because when the safety car comes in, you're off to the races again, and you might have been 30 seconds ahead of the driver behind you prior to the safety car, but you're all bunched up again. So having temperature, at the right amount for the tires, that's Critically important. A number of years ago, they added in something called the virtual safety car, which is basically a way of pretending that there's a safety car on track where all the drivers just kind of slow down a little bit. They have a set amount of time or a set speed basically that they sort of have to go around at, which is on their display, and they can see if they're within that allowance. There's no need for them all to get bunched up or anything, and it's basically in a situation where, okay, there's something on track where you all have to slow down, but we're pretty sure we can clear this off in like half a lap's time, so we don't need to release this other car, this safety car. You will see lots of safety cars, lots of virtual safety cars during the season. They might not be every race, but oftentimes you can get multiple ones during a race as well. Then there are the penalties. If you don't follow the flags, you don't like following the flag rules, well, you're going to get yourself some penalties. And penalties come in lots of different ways for lots of different things. We're not going to detail all of them here because it would take forever. And also there's always cases that you're not quite sure what penalty they're going to get for that. It's a little bit of like, I don't know, is that a drive-through? Is that a 5-second? You can get a drive-through penalty, which basically means that when you come around on your next lap or in a certain number of laps, you are not permitted to just keep driving. You have to drive through the pit lane, which is a slower part of the track. So it's like you did something bad. We are making you slow down for this part of this lap so that you don't do that again, or so that you're penalized for it. You can get that stuff for like jumping over chicanes, not staying within the track limits, cutting corners, that type of thing. Other infringements, you can get a 5-second penalty, which basically means that either 5 seconds is added to your time at the end of the race. So if you were in 4th position and 3 seconds ahead of who was in 5th, well, you're probably going to be in 5th now because you'll lose 5 seconds. More often than not, though, these come in the form of penalties that they take when they're in their next pit stop. So car comes in to change their tires, they stop, and there's 5 seconds where nobody's allowed to touch the car and they just have to wait. And then they can do it, and that's how the penalty is served. You know what's worse than 5-second penalties, though? 10-second penalties. They're the worst. You can get those for things like jump starting at the start of the race, speeding in the pit lane, ignoring blue flags, blocking people, generally being a jerk. You can get a 10-second. And 10-second penalties usually come in the form of stop-go penalties at pit stops. As Rob or Drew alluded to earlier, sometimes if you change your engine and do a bunch of engine change stuff, you can get a penalty. It won't be like a 10-second or a 5-second because it wasn't in the race. It was like whenever, just in between two races. So what they do is they give you a grid position penalty, which basically means that you are, wherever you qualify, we're going to knock you down 10 places from there, or 5 places, or sometimes 50 places because you've done so many things to your car, which is why they sort of pile them on in a race weekend because they can only really put you in last position. You can also get that if you do a big incident near the end of a race and they can't really penalize you for it, or they've only realized it was something after the race. You can get banned from races. Hasn't happened in the modern memory of F1, but it can happen. And you also can get a 10-place penalty after 5 reprimands, which I think is still the case this year. I was trying to look it up earlier. I couldn't get confirmation, but I still think that's where they are with that one. The last thing to say before getting into the changes we have for this year is the issue of defending or blocking. When are you blocking? When are you just defending your position? All that sort of stuff. Honestly, this is something you're just going to have to feel out by watching the sport, by listening to the commentators, by seeing what the drivers say after the fact and the discussions that happen. But there are a couple of rules of thumb when you are looking at a car that is trying to overtake another car and whether or not the car in front is fairly blocking as opposed to just, being completely ridiculous and unsporting and just getting in the way. Generally, double movements are not allowed, which means if you have a car coming up behind you and you think they're going to overtake to the right, you can move to the right, but you can't move to the right and then move to the left, or move to the left and then move to the right. Doing that sort of stuff increases the chance of a crash very highly, so you're not allowed to do that. You're also not allowed to late block. So if somebody dives down the inside and they're about to overtake you, you can't just throw your car last second in the direction, slam on the brakes. You generally have to leave a gap. That is a real open to interpretation thing, but the easiest way to understand the limits of that rule is you cannot run people off the track. So if you're side by side with somebody, generally you can't just force them off the track. You can force them onto the curbs maybe a bit, but you're not allowed to just like ram them off. That's not cool. And then there's a general interpretation of having an abnormal change in direction, which means if you sort of jerk to one side or do something that seems weird, that is the most sort of hard to define aspect of that rule. But like I said, generally, you're just going to have to feel that out. Couple of changes. Sorry, go on.
I'll just add one thing because this confused me a lot when I was getting into racing. The double movement thing. The crucial thing to remember is what you are allowed to do is regain the racing line entering a corner. So there's a lot of times where it will look to you like that guy made 2 moves. You're not allowed to do that. But you are allowed to like change sides of the track. But then say it's a left-hand corner. Most times corners are taken. You start on the outside of it. You clip the inside of the corner, and then you exit on the outside. It's like called apexing. Yeah, exactly. So if you are not on the outside, but that is the correct racing line, and you are ahead, you defended to the inside on the left. You are then allowed to zag out to the right to make the corner entry and take the normal racing line. So there are times it will look an awful lot like, well, that person's just blocking wildly here. But again, in the interpretive dance we all do in F1, that's perfectly legit. But then we find a bunch of other things that could happen during the corner to complain about, and we do.
Exactly, and it's a good point talking about the corners, because a big part of this is as you watch F1, you're going to know corners. Corners have their own racing lines, which is the general way you take it when there's no one else around you. You know, you'll know where the overtaking spots are in circuits, and there's places where overtakes are easier than other parts. You know, there's risky overtaking corners, risky strategies. Watching off F1, you really get to start to know these to the point where sometimes there's an instance during a race, like in the case of Max and Lewis at Silverstone back in 2021, and you hear the team principal saying, you don't overtake there. And you know, you do overtake there. People have overtaken there for years. It's just super tricky and you have to leave space. That's the sort of like, you know, detail and granularity that these conversations get into. But don't worry, after every race, we'll be here to have an argument on our microphones about it. Although we tend not to argue very often. I feel like we're pretty, you know, level-headed when it comes to that sort of stuff. So, changes this year. We're going to put these into 2 bins, technical and sporting. A couple of technical changes here. I'm not going to get into the super details on them. A bunch of regulations have come in to basically sort of, most of it is driver safety related. The first is the mirrors are larger because they just weren't able to see very well. They're tiny, these little mirrors, side mirrors. You don't have like a rear view mirror in an F1 car because you're sitting like in a bucket basically surrounded by the car. There's no rear window. But you do have 2 little mirrors out to the edges, and they were just ridiculously small, so they've made them bigger this year. They've also added a new mandatory roll hoop design, which is a protective part of the top of the car, kind of where that camera you were saying was, the little T-bar is on the car. And this is because of the crash at Silverstone last year with Guan Yu Zhou, who had a horrific crash. Not because of this, but one of the things that happened during that crash was that his roll hoop failed, which is basically, if the car turns over, it's kind of like having a roll cage in a car. You want to make sure that the driver's head is protected at all times. And that was one of the pieces of assembly that's meant to do that. So they have basically made it mandatory because it was not on his car in the way everyone thought it was supposed to be. They also have brought in something that is basically to outlaw porpoising, to make it so that you have to reduce the amount of porpoising, just because, especially with Ferrari and Mercedes last year having medical issues as a result of it. And then there's one weird one, which is the slot gap separator, which was in the Mercedes front wing, which was basically a piece of assembly which apparently was used to strengthen the position of the front wing, but crucially, it was perhaps giving an aerodynamic advantage. There was opaque language around the legality of that, and they have actually, in the sort of, I don't know, strengthening of the legalese, made it easier to do this. So whether or not the other teams are doing it, I'm not quite sure, but basically this slot gap separator, which connects the front wing to the rest of the chassis, is now allowed as long as you can prove that it is part of the structural soundness of the front wing and is not primarily give you an aerodynamic advantage. It can give you one, but that cannot be the main reason. So, we'll see you in court, I guess.
This is like when they've tried to keep people from turning mirrors into aerodynamic aids as well, where it's like, wait, why does your mirror look like a wing? To see better?
This is the beauty of F1. And look, the thing about F1 is the rules are kind of there to be broken a little bit. It's all about pushing the envelope. And I think it's sometimes, cost cap rules, maybe we get a bit more serious about. But this type of rule shithousery is kind of part and parcel of the world of F1. A couple of changes in terms of sporting regulations this year. 2 of the races are going to have 11 tyres available instead of 13. This is part of Formula One's sort of increasingly, but generally small ways in which they're trying to make it more environmentally friendly. So instead of the 13 tyres, you were allowed to have the sort of pool of 13 tyres that you use, whether or not they're hard or soft or C0s or whatever they are. You usually have 13 to use during a dry race weekend. That'll be brought down to 11. And for those 2 races in which they do that, they are doing a mandated type of tyre for qualifying. So that means in Q1, you have to run a hard. In Q2, you have to run a medium. And in Q3, you have to run a soft. That's going to be the first time that they're testing that one out, which is something we got wind of last year. It's not necessarily connected to that initial rule, but it's sort of, I don't know. It's a tire thing, so they're putting it together. This year, there are 3 days of preseason testing. I think there was 5 last year, but I think some of that was to do with COVID stuff. I can't quite remember. The tires this year, like I said, the full wets are apparently grippier. They have the new C0 compound, or rather the new C1 and renamed C0 compound. We also have 6 sprint races this year, which I'll get to when we go down where they are when we go down through the calendar. The issue of points allocation as a percentage of how much of the race has been finished, the language around that has also been clarified. 2 years ago during Spa, they didn't finish a race, but they had done 3 laps, so it meant that there was some points given out.
They did 3 laps under safety car.
They did.
By some lights, they never started that race.
So you know what they did? They said, hey, look, we all wanted, who was it? Who got his first points? It was
Russell.
George Russell.
Yeah, George
He
Russell.
got a podium.
He did. Yeah, he got a podium, right? So because of that, they changed the language to make sure it was clear. And then what happened last year at Suzuka, was they finished the race under green flag, but it was less than 75% of the race, but they still gave full points because the language at the time was, again, opaque enough that the issue was that the flag did not finish under a red flag. If it had finished under a red flag under 75%, they wouldn't have got full points. But because it was a green flag, they did. So they've basically...
So weird.
Yeah, so they've changed it to reflect the ininitial... what's the word? What they were trying to do with the rule, which was, look, if the race is 75%,
we're going to prorate the points.
Exactly. We're not going to give you full points unless at least 75% of the race has been run, regardless of if it ends under a red flag or a green flag. Don't worry about it. Even more opaque is what is going on with the political gestures law, which they rolled out and then rolled back. We'll see. They were trying to mandate drivers weren't allowed.
That's going to be a topic on the show next week, honestly, because it has been the long and short of it is they're trying to crack down on drivers making political statements because Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton were big on that, but F1 loves to race in totalitarian autocracies because that's
sports
where it's
wash that money, baby.
Yeah, so they tried to crack down on that, and then all hell broke loose, and we don't know where that's going to end up.
We really don't. F1 say that it was taken too seriously, that everyone else said they didn't. So the new rules that they came out was basically you can say whatever you want, you can do whatever you want, you just can't wear certain things at certain parts of the thing. Whatever. We'll see it when it comes to it. Political rules are meant to be broken. Come on. And then the last thing to say is that there's a general relaxation of COVID protocols, so we probably will not see as much mask wearing and stuff like that around the paddock. Although I suspect Lewis Hamilton will probably continue to wear a mask because he was one of the drivers who got COVID and it really seemed to stick with him. And that, as far as I know, is all the changes we have in 2023.
Awesome. Well done, Denny. Well, let's get to. There's a sort of a smattering of lingo here that we've kind of added to over the years that you'll hear on the broadcast. You'll hear us talk about, and it's not always apparent what it is. So I can go through these. Maybe jump in if you have any.
Throw us a couple.
To add here.
Test us
All
like pop quiz.
All right, pop quiz, Danny. What's a lockup?
A lockup. Okay, this is when you're braking in an F1 car. F1 cars don't have the same fancy brakes that your road car does.
They do not have anti-lock brakes.
They do not have anti-lock brakes, and they don't have a lot of other bits around that.
No. You can't answer what a lockup is by saying it's like when you don't have anti-lock brakes. You're not allowed to do that.
Okay. So because of that, the amount of pressure that the driver is putting on the brake pedal during braking is on a curve. It is part of the dance. They are trying to essentially make it so that they are slowing down at the correct rate of slowdown without.
Alright, he fucked it. All right, the thing
thing
Danny's missing is tire rotation. The tires have to continue rotating to effectively slow the car. Like the lockup is when the tire seizes. And now the car is skidding along tires that are basically no longer rotating as they should be, and so that's where you tend to get your big. That's what you tend to see when you get a big lockup.
And then you get a flat spot, which isn't on the list, but that's when imagine you're a racer, you call it here, or rubber to our European listeners. When you rub an eraser on a piece of paper and it starts to like flat spot, that happens on a tire. Those tires ain't good anymore, so you got to go back and change them.
Yeah, a lot of bad vibrations that the drivers can definitely feel. And you'll be able to spot a lockup by a puff of tire smoke. All right, box, Rob.
Oh, that's just the radio call to come into the pits. So when they tell drivers to box, it means it is time to come into the pits for your service.
Again, kind of new, like past decade stuff. Apparently, not sure if it's true or the old wives' tale, but apparently because box is easier to say over a radio, easier to hear than pit was.
Can't be misheard as well.
Yes,
yeah.
Because you might be saying shit. Take a shit. You never know.
You never know. Speed trap is one that I've gotten. People have asked me like, "What's the speed like?" It's a weird word for. Honestly, I don't know why they even have a term for this. Speed trap is just the part of the track where the cars are the fastest. It's not like a speed trap on the highway where you're going to get pulled over or anything like that. It's just the name of the. It's usually where they put the the radar gun for the TV broadcast, so you can see just how fast these cars are going. It doesn't really have any sporting implications. Danny, you explained back markers. Those are the cars that are typically in the lower end of the field in the running that are getting lapped by the faster cars. Danny, what are marbles?
F1 tires are softy soft, like we said. Little pieces of them come off as they abrade. Is that what we say? As they get chucked up by the amount by cornering and turning and all that sort of stuff. And basically what you'll find is over the course of usually the race mostly, there is a sort of a little carpet of these marbles. They're known as little chunks of tiny little pieces of tire basically, and that isn't anything worth mentioning except for the fact you don't really want to drive on them because then they stick to the tire, gives you an inconsistent sort of touch with the circuit, and it can cause you problems. And generally if you go out into the marbles, it takes a couple of corners for you to shake them off your car and get the grip you had prior to it.
All right, Rob, can you tell us the difference between oversteer and understeer?
Yeah. So let's see. Understeer is probably what most people are familiar with from a road car. It is where the nose of the car cannot maintain the angle of the turn. So it is, you are trying to turn at a more acute angle, but the line the car is taking is considerably less acute. The corner is going away from you, and your car is heading in a different way. Most road cars are tuned to produce understeer because it is safer, because oversteer is when you are trying to make the angle of a turn And actually, and often quite sharply and spectacularly, the nose of the car makes a more acute turn, and frequently what you might get is an actual spin if the oversteer goes untamed. And so that is something that is much more common with rear-wheel drive cars, with sports cars, and it is a thing that requires a little more delicate touch on the controls, a little more training to know what to do with it.
I always like to think of understeer as what happens when you load up Gran Turismo and you try to play it like Mario Kart.
Right.
And you're like, why is my car not turning at all? Okay, I can take undercut.
Yeah, you're good at this.
Somebody else take overcut because I always get it wrong. All right, undercut. So let's say you are you're on the track behind another car. And neither of you have pitted yet. So per the rules, you will both have to pit at some point. You're behind that car. You pit first. Now, the other car is lapping faster than you because you're in the pits going slow. So you come out of the pits way behind that car. But you've got new tires. So when he pits, he's effectively going to lose the same amount of time that you do. But the difference is because you are on those new tires, you are going to be going faster than he will be. You're making up time. So when he comes in for his pit stop, even though you've spent the same amount of time doing your pit stop, because you were on new tires sooner, you will have gone faster than him and you will beat him out of the pits. Did I do that right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And also worth mentioning, your use of him there as well is something that didn't come up earlier, which is the fact that currently and for a long time there haven't been female F1 drivers, and it's been something that we've talked about a lot over the years because of the W Series, which is an all women's racing series that is not connected to F1, but is sort of like part of the international driving circus and sometimes drives on F1 weekends. But even given that and all the progress they've had, even the multiple world champion of that can't seem to get into F1 or any of the lower disciplines, F2 or F3 as well. There's Formula E has had some women, but it's few and far between. We actually have fewer women race directors as well, or not race directors, team principals than we used to as well.
Yes, there is. So yeah, this is a beat that we follow. We try to do our best. The F1 Academy is a new thing that Formula One has announced. It is.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's an official Formula One endeavor, and it is starting this year. There are 5 teams, and they are a lot of the teams that are in like Formula 2 and Formula 3. We don't really know how it works yet, but be on the lookout for that to start as well.
Which is probably a good time for that because last year W Series ran into a bit of trouble and they literally couldn't finish their season because they ran out of money.
Due to funding.
Yeah, because somebody pulled out. So, yeah.
Okay, who wants to take overcut?
Oh,
all
boy.
Right. So
it's the opposite.
Yeah, it basically is. So in think about the example before where you pull in first to get on fresh tires, to like set faster lap times and make up the difference against your opponent who was ahead of you, and by the time they pit, you overtake them. Overcutting, there's a couple of ways this can play out broadly strategically. Like one version of it might be that effectively you've had maybe the pace in hand to pass this car, but you haven't wanted to make the attack. The car that is ahead comes in for its pit stop. Car behind is suddenly released and has had pace in hand and can suddenly, in clear air, set a bunch of fast times and effectively make up the ground that it might have lost in its upcoming pit stop. More common than that is just that it effectively you are trying a different tire strategy. That what you are trying to do is someone comes in and rather than trying to time it within just like a lap or two, you might be trying to stretch your entire tire strategy out so that maybe you're like making fewer stops, or that it's just going to end up being optimal for you to stay out longer, especially if maybe you've identified that there's more favorable traffic conditions. If you stay out and the other guy's going to come out in a mess. Undercutting, I think, is what you tend to see the most, because I think it is the most like predictable way that it can unfold. Like, this is like, undercutting is the preferred tactic of F1 teams, which is why a lot of times you will see them give instructions to drivers where whatever the guy in front of you is going to do the opposite. If he stays out, you come in, etc. Just being like hyper reactive. Overcutting is hard to pull off because, as we've alluded to, like, older tires are not better tires. Like, basically, that's just never the case. So it's a riskier strategy that you see pulled out less often, and generally requires like some other elements being in play. Whereas undercut is something that always feels to me like it's much more in the hands of, like, you tell driver go fast. Get out there on the fresh tires, kick ass.
Last year was a little bit of a curveball with that, because the new tires seemed to take a bit, like half a lap more to get up to speed. So the undercut, as a result, was less dependable. And kind of as a byproduct of that, the overcut became a little bit more common when it hadn't been very common in a while.
Right, because if you come out on new tires and you're still going the same speed or slower than that other guy who's still out on the old tires, well, then you're not making up any time.
Exactly, especially if they've got clean air, which Rob was alluding to.
Danny, what's a purple sector? What is going purple?
Means you did the best. It means you're the best. You're the top dog. The bee's knees. Means you got faster. Purple lap means you're the fastest lap, and purple sector means you're the fastest sector. Each F1 track is split up into 3 sectors, where they say that's the first part, that's the second part, that's the third part. It's fairly arbitrary, but it generally means dividing the track into 3. So oftentimes, if there is a part of the track that has a straightaway in it, cars that are a bit better at that might get purples, and cars that are better at maybe the twisty turns, taking turns faster, might be better in an arena sector, close to the end of the track in sector 3. But yeah, purple is good. You'll see a lot of purple on the timing boards at the start of qualifying.
Yeah, and I think it comes from just the timing screens that F1 has used for a long time. The color purple,
because green means better, yellow means worse. You'll
see this a lot in qualifying, especially where they'll highlight the sector times as each lap is progressing per driver, and purple is the fastest overall. Green means the driver has improved on their own time, and yellow means that there has been no improvement. All right, a couple more tire-related lingo here. Like Rob said, everything is about tires. Tire cliff is when the tire basically stops being as fast as it needs to be. If you charted the speed of a tire over time, you would see it gradually taper and then plummet, almost as if off a cliff. And so when that happens, then it's time to pit. And generally you want to try to time that as well as possible. Rob, can you describe blistering and graining?
Graining is my overcut, by the way. The graining is the one that I'm there. So blistering. So the thing about a tire is that it's kind of got 2 parts. There's the surface of the tire, and there's the sort of carcass of the tire, the body of the tire. And in general, like as you might expect, the surface has a lot of like really radical fluctuations in temperature. It gets really, really hot. The body heats up slower. It tends to retain heat a bit more because of all that mass. Blistering tends to be blistering is where the surface of the tire gets so rapidly abraded that a bit like skin, honestly, to be a bit gross about it, but like if you like have a bit of like, you ever had like a bad burn or something, there's that point where like parts of it like begin to like peel off or flake off. That happens to a tire. The outer surface of a tire is the skin of the tire, and if it gets ill-treated, if it gets like super overheated, often maybe as a byproduct of like a little bit of a lockup or something like that, what you will get are tire blisters, where like chunks of the tire can suddenly just sort of fall off. And at that point, not only are you like, that is undermining the structure of the tire. So in addition to it kind of like changing the shape of the tire, like blistering tends to be really scary because once it tends to happen, it tends to keep having like knock-on effects of like other parts of the tire begin to wear down faster. So when you see a tire blister show up, that tends to be a real bad sign for the life of that tire. Graining.
My understanding.
Yeah.
You want me to take this one, or Danny?
Yeah.
Do you know graining? I think.
Maybe not. Now I'm worried I don't because of Rob's.
My understanding is that graining is a phase. It's an early phase in the tire, not right when you put the tires on, but generally the first few laps, and the tire does go through like kind of a breaking in period. It's up to temperature, but it's not quite there yet, and so it's almost like you have to wear off a little bit of the the sheen to get down to the really fast parts. And so drivers will complain about graining, and they'll be a little slower, but it's not that they're near the tire cliff necessarily. It's just that they're in a bad phase of the tire. I think. All right, that's all the lingo I got. Let's go to the calendar.
Yeah, so we've talked about
year.
the drivers, we talked about the teams, but arguably the biggest characters in Formula One are the circuits themselves, some of which have been with the sport since its founding days in the 1950s, some of which are a little bit newer. And this year we have more than ever before, 23. We should have had 24, but one of them has been cancelled. It's the most we've ever had, and it is really all about the circus of speed that rounds and rounds the world, and often does it in a very inefficient manner, which seems contrary to their environmental needs. But we've banged that drum quite a lot. So a couple of top notes before I get down to the actual order of the circuits this year. First of all, Qatar is back. We had them come in 2021 to replace Melbourne, I believe. Then it didn't happen last year, partly because of the other sports washing thing they were doing, which was the World Cup, which took place just a number of months ago. China's also cancelled again this year for the fourth year in a row. Is that right? No, 20. Was it 2020? I guess it is it? God, that's terrifying. The Sochi Grand Prix is not happening. The Russian Grand Prix's contract has actually been torn up. So the new circuit that they were building is also now apparently just not happening. This obviously is a result of their illegal invasion of the sovereign territory of Ukraine. France, like words like honey in my ear. France has been cancelled, although we did have some good races there, so now I'm feeling weird about it. The Castellet race at Paul Ricard, Circuit Paul Ricard, is not happening this year, although the venue holders have said that it may perhaps enter a rotational placement in the calendar, so we may get it back next year. And this year is the first race of the Vegas Grand Prix since the time they drove around Caesars Palace parking lot in 1982. The Vegas Grand Prix, if you got a ticket to it, fair play. You probably have to remortgage your house. It's happening around midnight when it happens, which should be interesting later this year. It is the first time, in fact, since 1982, the last time they raced in Vegas, that the American nation has 3 races. There was a very long time where they had 0, and because of the new owners and because of the popularity of the sport, in part because of Drive to Survive, we have had more and more.
And this podcast.
And of course this podcast. Yes, we are. At any moment now, Chase Carey will turn up. Well, he's not in charge anymore, but somebody will turn up and give us that check. So the races themselves, let's get into it. The season is basically split into 2 halves with a bit of a summer break in the middle. 13 races at the top and 10 on the other side. We start on the 5th of March in Bahrain. Then we drive just down the road to Saudi Arabia. for the Jeddah Grand Prix, which is a street circuit, on the 19th. Then we hop on a plane all the way to Australia. Albert Park in Melbourne, great circuit. Everyone loves it, on the 2nd of April. Bit of a gap then as we come back towards Azerbaijan for the Baku City Circuit, one of the more popular new city circuits that's been added. That's on the 30th of April, and it's also the first sprint weekend we're going to have. It's the 1st of the 6th. So
and when Danny says a street circuit, it's literally they close down city streets and race on the street. It's pretty cool.
This one has a castle.
Especially when your city has a castle in it, yeah.
You can crash into it, yeah. So yes, street circuits. Some of them are hybrids, but are kind of half and half. Albert Park is one of those in Australia. Baku is a bona fide street circuit. Interestingly enough, I kind of consider the next one, the Miami Grand Prix, which started last year. It's kind of also a street circuit, even though it's not. It takes place in a car park, much like the Caesars Palace in 1982. This one outside of the Miami Dolphins Stadium, Miami International Autodrome, they call it, in Florida. That's on the 7th of May. On the 21st of May, we jump back to Europe for Imola in Italy. Then a week later, they're in Monaco in the south of France, in Monte Carlo for the Monaco Grand Prix, which is basically
south of France.
South of France, yeah.
It's
on the southern coast, and it is a principality, tax haven, yada yada yada. The race is basically the most street circuit you'll ever see, and although the races are never really that good, it's kind of like it's a jewel in the crown of motorsports, yada yada yada. Then we're off to Barcelona for the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya in Spain on the 4th of June. Then we're off to Canada on the 18th of June for the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. A very popular track, that one. Canada's not in Europe, so it's weird that they always stick it there, because we're back to Europe for the Red Bull Ring, previously known as the A1 Ring. It's a pretty old Austrian circuit on the 2nd of July. That is the second sprint race. They did hold one last year, so we've seen how it goes there. Silverstone had a sprint race last year in England. This is sort of the home of F1. It's where the first F1 race ever took place post-war. It takes place on what was very often what tracks were, which was old Air Force bases. 3 runways in a triangle formation for planes taking off to bomb various parts of Europe. And Silverstone was a track that was built on one of those. It is a fantastic circuit that they have upgraded and changed a lot over the years. We're back there on the 9th of July. Not a sprint race this year. Then we're off to the Hungaroring, which may surprise you, is in Hungary on the 23rd of July. And the final race of the first half of the season, which is usually the first race of the second half, but not this year, is Spa-Francorchamps in the Ardennes Forest. Speaking of World War II, the Belgian Grand Prix, absolutely terrific circuit, one of fan favourites, often produces good races, if not good races, wet races. The 30th of July is the final race of the first half of the year. Then we have a little bit of a break. We return on the 27th of August to go to the sunny sand beaches of the Netherlands for Zandvoort and the Dutch Grand Prix. Expect lots of William of Orange coloured fans as they cheer on Max Verstappen. We're back to Italy after that on the 3rd of September for the Monza Grand Prix, another fan favourite, the Italian Grand Prix, basically the spiritual home of Ferrari. The Singapore Grand Prix is next on the 17th of September. It's a night race in the city streets of Singapore. Absolutely terrific. It's a good race, but it's not the best race in that part of the world, because the Japanese Grand Prix is right after that in Suzuka. Absolute classic track on the 24th of September. Then we have a very interesting double sprint race back to back. The Qatar Grand Prix at Lusail International Circuit, relatively new one to the calendar, is on the 8th of October. 2 weeks later, we're in COTA, which is in Austin, Texas, the Circuit of the Americas, for the United States Grand Prix, which is becoming an increasingly weird name for that Grand Prix, considering there are multiple ones of it. The Mexico City Grand Prix is after that in Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez on the 29th of October, just a week after the Austin Grand Prix. That one takes place half in streets, half on a circuit, and half in a baseball field. It's a bit of a weird one. Then we're off to Sao Paulo for Interlagos. The Brazilian Grand Prix was often the final Grand Prix of the year in times gone by. That is the final sprint race of the year and the third sprint race in 4 races. So they're really going hard on the sprint races.
Man,
at the end of the season. Interlagos also had a sprint race. I want to say it wasn't last year and it was the year before. I could be wrong. It was last year?
Yeah, because remember, that's the one where Ferrari does the wild rain call in quali.
Okay.
And then the sprint race where George overtakes for the lead, yeah.
Yes. So, yeah, this is the second time around they've had it then as well. And then, like I said, Sao Paulo Interlagos was often the final race of the season. In more recent years, it has been the penultimate race of the season. It has now lost that. The penultimate race will be back in America, up in Las Vegas, for that Las Vegas street circuit, literally driving down the strip in Las Vegas, Nevada on the 18th of November. And then the season ends, as it has done since this track joined us, probably 12 years ago now, maybe, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix at Yas Marina Circuit, Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, will finish the season on the 26th of November, our 23rd race of the year.
It just dawned on me, because I've like made my peace with not going to the Vegas race, but like if it's a close championship and like 5th November rolls around, we get a good race out of Brazil, you got 2 weeks to think about like ways you could feasibly make Vegas happen.
Dude, I like many of the folks in the Discord, I was online looking at tickets.
Oh yeah, me too.
And it was just outrageous. Like, and I feel like you go into one of those, kind of being like, I'm going to spend a stupid amount of money and I have to be okay with that. And even with that in my head, I was like, no, like, are you insane? Absolutely not. And I think it'll look good on TV. So,
Yeah, I'm agree. I am in agreement with you. Oh boy, it's late.
It is late. It's a long podcast. It's the longest podcast of the year by a mile. So.
Yes, it is. And with that, if you want to watch any of those races, if you're in the U.S., you have 2 ways to watch on television, ESPN and F1 TV. As far as I know, ESPN only comes in a cable package, but you can use your cable login to access the ESPN app, and at least on Apple TV, it is decent. If you don't already have ESPN, your best bet might then be F1 TV, which is F1's subscription service. There are 2 tiers. The Pro tier is $10 a month, or $64 right now for the year, and allows you to watch every session live and on demand. If you don't care about watching in a timely manner, though, the Access tier is cheaper at $3 a month or $27 a year, but you have to wait 2 days to watch on-demand replays of the sessions. Both tiers also provide access to the historic F1 archive, so if you want to go back and watch the entire 2021 season, which was a banger, you can do that. If you don't feel like watching entire races yet, there's also the official Shift F1. There is the official Shift F1 YouTube channel, but we don't have highlights.
No, but now we have this podcast.
It's true.
In video form for the first time ever. So, hi, Mom.
I'm going to have to start shaving for these.
Rob is now, it has to reconsider the fact that it's the 20-something of February, it's Christmas trees in the background of the shot, but we haven't, it's not like we're judging him about it or anything.
But yeah, F1's YouTube channel has highlights of each session, with the races being edited down to about 7 minutes apiece. YouTube is usually how I consume the practice sessions, though I know many of our listeners just watch the YouTube highlights of everything and listen to our podcast to get the full picture of the race. So it is up to you.
I would say as well, just as to editorialize it a little bit, I really think F1 TV is very good. In its initial years, we were very critical of some of the technical foibles and especially the stuff they had on the archive. And now they produce kind of a lot of decent programming too. And also the F1 YouTube channel has gotten so good at like producing series, some of which are edited versions of F1 TV, like the Jolyon Palmer analysis stuff and like, just various...
Sam Collins.
Yeah, exactly. Just smart people, smarter than us, talking about how these cars work and what's going on.
It's a far cry from the 2000s where if like you post a highlight of F1, Bernie Ecclestone would send assassins to your house.
Dude, was it Giant Bomb? You couldn't post the F1 logo on the game pages without a cease and desist coming in. So
yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, they have really turned it around. But if you just can't wait to watch some F1, testing begins Thursday of this week. Technically, it begins Wednesday night if you are in the
West Coast,
the West Coast, at 11 p.m. But you can watch all of that. It probably won't be on ESPN. Here's another reason why you might want F1 TV. It won't be on ESPN likely, but it might be on, or it will probably be on F1 TV.
Yeah,
wheel testing. I've got some miscellaneous stuff here that I didn't know where else to put. The cars go at upwards of 220 miles an hour. If you want to know how fast them cars go. You might see graphics saying pit window open. Again, this is one of those things that confuses people because it's not a rule or anything. It's just the broadcasters predicting when the cars might pit. So if you see that flash up on the screen, that's what that means. The cars do have lights on the back of them. They will turn on if it's raining, but they will also flash sometimes. And that is, they'll flash whenever the car is recovering energy and charging the battery with that hybrid system. And they do that because generally that means the car is slowing down. So when you hit the brakes in the car, not only are you using the brake pads, you're also using that dynamo to generate electricity. And so you want to clue the guy in behind you that, hey, I'm slowing down, don't run into me. And the last thing that you'll probably see after the races is drivers going and stepping on a scale. And you also see cars going onto their own scale sometimes. And that is because there is a minimum weight limit for this stuff. And they weigh both the car and the driver separately and add them together so that you can be sure that you're not below the minimum weight. In days past, these days they keep the drivers pretty separate and weigh them as soon as they hop out of the car. But in days past, like in the 70s or whatever, you could go like hug your team after you got first place, and they would like stuff a wrench down your overalls so that you made weight. But that's what's happening when you see the scale come out.
To that, like just miscellaneous notes, I guess.
I got
cars.
one too.
The cars have to finish with enough fuel in the tank to produce a sample to verify that you were like in conformity with all the rules. And F1 does not mess around with this. A couple of years ago, the Aston Martin team could not produce a sample. They swore up and down that like the fuel was somewhere in that car, must have gotten into the fuel injection system or something, but they couldn't produce the sample. They had a season best result taken away from them. They were just disqualified from the race for not being able to do that. The other concept you will hear bandied about is Park for May. They are allowed to tune the cars and work on and modify them quite a bit until they roll out for a lap in qualifying. Once they set a time in a qualifying session, the car setup is locked in. They can't really adjust that until the race.
Yeah. And my similar to the fuel stuff, the drivers drink while they're driving. They have a drink. It's not necessarily water, but it's probably water-ish with like
Heineken 00.
Exactly, all that sort of something to help them with all the sweating they do, because the drivers lose a lot of weight, especially in the hot races. It is a very physical sport, very tough on the neck because of the lateral G forces that these cars put the drivers under. Sometimes the drink breaks, especially if you're Kimi Räikkönen, and it pours all over yourself, but the drivers do not pee in the car, which is something that I am also experiencing on this 2.5 hour long podcast, having just drank 2 Diet Cokes.
And they are athletes. I mean, you only need to look at some of George Russell's thirsty shirtless pics.
And I do.
And then look at just how gassed that guy is when he gets out of his car at the end of a race.
Yeah, it's wild. Their faces look gaunt sometimes when they come out. Yeah. It's really wild.
All right. Well, as we close out here, I do want to just thank every F1 newcomer out there. I know it can be intimidating to jump into something like this, and the more annoying F1 fans can be pretty protective of their beloved sport. But racing is for everyone, and that is what we believe. We love it, and we want more people to be excited about it. So our goal here is to keep the show accessible so that more people can learn it too. You know, it's not to say that we dumb things down or anything, but we try not to assume that people know what an undercut is, for example. So if you do have questions, even if you think that we've answered them before, still write in at shiftf1podcast@gmail.com, or you can go to f1.cool/emails. It's our website. Because we love hearing what's difficult to grasp, and it helps us make this episode better. It helps us make the seasons better. So chances are, if you have that question, then others have it too.
Yeah, our email section is generally like some pretty thoughtful questions about what a driver did at a certain turn, and also somebody asking what's graining. That's all's fair. And yeah, if anything, I'm delighted about new F1 fans because F1's gotten more popular. The infrastructure's better. There's more racing. It's been great for the sport. So I don't know why anyone would begrudge new people getting in, especially when you see how young and varied the type of F1 fan is now, as opposed to what it was sort of historically, I guess.
Yeah, and our the Shift F1 Discord is also really newbie friendly. Thanks mostly to our incredible moderators.
Yes.
So if you'd like to join that, you can join the Patreon. The lowest tier gets you access to the Discord. And speaking of those tiers, Danny, do you want to run them down real quick here?
Sure. Yeah. So our Patreon, we started it a number of years ago. It is. If you like our podcast, it is basically a place to get a lot more of it. It also supports the show. Like we said, we don't do ads on this podcast or anything. So that's obviously a big part of it. $5 a month, you get access to the Discord, but you also get access to monthly bonus podcasts. And at this stage, 5 years worth of backlog of those podcasts too, and they're all super evergreen because they're about racing movies or racing disciplines. You could listen to them today and I would have the same opinions of Fast and the Furious now as I would have if we'd done it 4 years ago. Speed Racer one was very good. So we've done bunches of these, and you get access to all of them if you sign up right now. For $10 a month, we have the Media Pass, which historically had a couple of videos, or a couple dozen videos that I'd done, a couple of ones where we had reviewed beers and wines from various drivers. Me playing
everybody's got a drink.
Exactly. Me playing old F1 video games. But because of the new video initiative this year, I'm also editing and posting these episodes to YouTube. Those bonus podcasts are also going to have videos in that tier as well. So you'll get a monthly video podcast on that of the audio version in that $10 tier. And then if you are a crazy person and you want to slap your logo to the side of the Shift F1 mobile, you can become a title sponsor. This was basically a joke that we did that went out of control. For $50 a month, we will name your name at the top of every podcast. We didn't do it this podcast because I'm going to do it right now. Thank you to all of our incredible title sponsors: Kikacha of the Art, at Team Blackjack, Michael Maves, Gordy's Army, at Talking Autos, Olivia Evans, IronStation.dev, TelemetryDeck.com, David Moole, Drew Stewart, Bailey Foote, Abdullah Althani, Jason Chadwick, Abraham Getchell, Enzo and Ayrton, hashtag Bunny Crimes, Snigs, Alex Goucher, Max Faltar, Circuit Demon, Troy Stammer, William Rumpf, Irvine Clinical Research, still in here, doing the research, Lackland the Maddened Man, and Jason Kelly. I am shocked and joyful over the complete lack of attrition on the title sponsor. I was sure we were going to lose some this year, like Mission Winnow. Sometimes you just fall out of favor. Not this crowd. Somehow they are still sticking with us.
They're not crypto money.
No, exactly.
They're still on our car.
Who knows though? I have to visit IronStation.dev actually. Who knows? Maybe they are.
Have you checked out TelemetryDeck.com? It's pretty cool. It
is pretty cool actually.
Honestly, the only reason we continue to do this is the patrons and the listeners. So thank you everyone who supports us. Thank you everyone who listens. Thank you for getting all the way through the preseason primer. I am so excited to begin another season of Formula One. Final thoughts here, Danny?
Yeah, I would say if you've listened to the end of this is the longest and most difficult or most technical one. It's kind of like like anything. It's like you're about to have a kid and you have to go to your, maternity class and listen and take notes and everything. The process of watching F1, don't take it as work. Please, don't enter it that way. Don't worry about not knowing things. It's like any sport. you will grow to love it in the way that you like it. You might like this sport for totally different reasons than somebody else. You'll warm to a driver for reasons that you don't really understand, but you'll just like them. Valtteri Bottas and Drew. I don't know why he likes them that much, but he just loves them. He loves a Mercedes hat. I love Haas because Gunther Steiner is just a weird dude. You all have your own reasons for it, and our podcast every week is a very fun sort of bunch of us catching up, talking about it, trying our best to summarize without being judgmental, and I think it's generally we try and take a bit of joy out of every race weekend, especially given what happened in 2020, not just to racing but also the fact that we were so alone and there was, you know, such craziness going on in the world. I think that just solidified our sort of enjoy it while it's going on kind of mentality. So I'm looking forward to the year that's in it. There's a lot of races, so there's going to be a lot of podcasts.
Yes, indeed. All right, final thoughts, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, this is always an interesting show to do because, like, I'm always a little worried, like, so we're just going to be rehashing so much stuff year in, year out. And some of it's that, but, like, the show, much like the car designs themselves, you know, every year I'm like, cars look roughly like they did last year. But if you see a car from like 5 years ago, you're like, that's nothing like what is racing now. And that's kind of what this show brings me face to face with every year is like, I'm like, yeah, it's roughly in the same place as it was last year, except for all these things that have changed. And so to an extent, like, you know, we've been following the sport for a long time, but every year you end up kind of being a little bit of a newbie yourself.
Yeah, well said. Well, if you would like to support the show and get access to all of our bonus episodes and the official Shift F1 Discord, you can do so over at patreon.com/shiftf1. Have a good race weekend, everyone. We will see you all next week.